what effectively is our first public meeting of the municipal year of the Communities, Environment and Highway Select Committee, as is a remote meeting. And we have a very, as colleagues know, we've got a very full agenda today, but we'll try and cover all the topics as rigorously and robustly as we possibly can. So let's go through the agenda now then. Apologies for absent. Jan Mason has sent her apologies, and I hope Jan's feeling much better very soon. Apologies. Substitutions, we have Mark Sugden for Keith Witham, so welcome to Mark. I don't think we have any more. No, unless Kunwa, if there's any additional apologies, could you let us know? But I haven't received any.
None, John.
Okay, thanks. Minutes of the previous meeting, which was years ago. I assume that everyone's read those diligently and they are approved. Thank you. Declarations of interest. I don't think we have any. Thank you very much indeed. So we now move on to the substantive part of the agenda, questions and petitions, and we have two public questions and one member question, and the order in which I, with your permission, will take these is the first will be from Councillor Elizabeth Daly, and then we'll move to the member's question from Catherine, and then the second question from Councillor Kennedy. We'll take with the petition and the substantive item relating to Southwestern Railways. I think it makes it easier for subjects on the same matter to be taken in the relevant agenda items. So assuming that is acceptable, we'll do that. So the first public question is from Councillor Elizabeth Daly. Is Mrs. Councillor Daly? Yes, I think I can see her. Thank you for your question. I think there must presumably a response from the portfolio holder or an officer to Councillor Daly's question on the 20-mile-an-hour zone. And once the question has been answered, then Councillor Daly is entitled to a supplementary. So can somebody, can an officer please respond to Councillor Daly's question?
Right, sorry for that. I'm gonna ask actually if Lucy might want to come in on this one actually, if that's all right. So sorry, we've got Duncan. Sorry, Duncan has come up, so I will hand over to Duncan.
Sure, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, let me just, I've drafted a response. I just want to try and bring it up. I wasn't expecting to, but yeah, so.
It's in the chat, Duncan, if it helps.
Yeah, I've just found it now. Thank you, Matt. So, yeah, the County Council are currently consulting on the new local transport plan LTP4, and in that places a much greater priority on sustainable travel hierarchy, with walking and cycling at the top. So within that policy, like local transport plan, it advises that making 20 mile per hour the speed limit for shopping and residential streets where appropriate is what we'll be looking to do. But there are already a number of 20 mile an hour schemes being introduced around the county. There's already one in Reigate Town Centre and several roads adjacent to Guildford Town Centre, bounded by Woodbridge Road, York Road and Stoke Road. And also there's a lot of work taking place behind the scenes at the moment to introduce 20 mile an hour schemes in Farnham, Caterham and Weybridge town centres. So that's what's happening under our current policy. So I don't see the policy really being a barrier or bureaucratic obstacle. In fact, it's empowering communities to make requests and being consulted, and making sure that local councillors are consulted so that they have a say on what the speed limits are on the roads where they live, within the framework set by the county council and in consultation with the police. There's also the procedure that central government set out to advertise local speed limit orders, and that's like a legal process as well. So that's a necessary part of it and ensures anyone has the opportunity to raise concerns or objections over speed limits. So we don't agree that there's procedural obstacles such to 20 schemes. Instead, our process ensures that local people are consulted appropriately and that crucially, that new schemes are effective in managing vehicle speeds. Simply putting up a speed limit sign when the existing speeds are very much higher than 20 won't be successful in bringing those speeds down successfully to that new 20 desired limit. In some cases, where the speeds are higher, you have to support in engineering supporting measures to make it work. Otherwise, we'll be wasting money on schemes that won't work. Thank you.
Thank you, Duncan. Councillor Daly, your opportunity to ask a supplementary or make a very brief comment on that.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you, Duncan. That is really great news. I've noticed that the 20 miles per hour is basically all over the place in London. Was a bit of a nuisance, I think, to start with, but it is now working very successfully. The only other thing I would ask is, what would be the mechanism as a Bookham councillor to enable us to get this started? Is there a timetable as you're working your way round? Sorry? Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah.
Sorry, can't hear.
Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. With by magic. Take your earphones out, says Paul Deach. Excellent. Duncan, do you want to make a quick response to Councillor Daly? And you're muted. Well, we can't go on like this, hissing at each other. Let's see if we can resolve.
Do you want me to jump in instead?
Yes,
while Duncan tries to sort that? So the best route, Councillor Daly, is actually going through the Mole Valley local committee. If there are any areas, I would first request a speed survey through the local committee, or the divisional county councillor can actually get those organised as well with some money from their revenue element of their highways allocation. And then that will determine that if the speeds are between 20 and 24, the signage can just be changed. If it's anything higher than that, there will need to be some additional measures, as Duncan mentioned, about engineering works. If it's over 26 miles an hour, for example, that will have to be funded through the Mole Valley local committee, and that's where it becomes a bit more expensive. If you can get the speed surveys done first through the divisional county councillor, that speeds things up considerably, because I think most local committees, they're all slightly different, will make a decision in November what to put on the running list for the new financial year, if anything.
Thanks.
So I hope that helps, but Duncan might jump back in anyway.
No, and we can't go on all day on one question. Though is a very important one, and thank Councillor Daly very much indeed for, and I hope some of the answers, at least the answers that were given, will help you on your way. Thank you very much indeed. Second question is Catherine's member question on funding of the active travel. Who's going to provide? I mean, this is unfortunately about virtual meetings. You can't necessarily look at the chat box all the time. So in this instance, we're probably going to have to give Catherine an oral response if we can from Matt or any of the team. And to Catherine's question, and Catherine then has a response.
I think on this one, sorry. So I know Matt has put a response in the chat box, but I think we'll bring in Lucy to respond on this one. Lucy, can you? Very quickly, short and sharp, so that Catherine can come back.
Sure. So the question was about the additional money. So we've been obviously bidding to. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to catch up with the text in the chat. So we've been bidding and got other money through the tranche opportunities, and so we have kind of been progressing those more long-term schemes where we see the benefits of the greater change. So in terms of the £8,000 that was kind of initially suggested as match funding, that wasn't needed at the time, but that still kind of can be available if it needs to match further tranches. So the focus was, I suppose, shifting to the longer term opportunities that we had through the tranche funding. So that's the approach we've taken with that commitment.
Thanks, Lucy. Catherine.
Yes, thank you for that. The 848,000, I think it is mentioned as, it's just whether you feel that it is actually earmarked to support active travel in the future rather than highway improvements, which are a bit broader. It's that, you know, is it really earmarked for active travel? Or
I think, well, we would want to spend money where the need is best determined, I suppose, and lots of the ambition, certainly as is explained in the LTP, sort of ambitions, I suppose, is about more active travel, more sustainable travel. So I would feel confident that it would be around delivering those schemes. That's the focus for us. But each kind of scheme, is determined on its own merit, I suppose. So it could be slightly broader than that, but the focus would be around active travel, definitely.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Lucy. Thanks, Catherine. Okay. Very much indeed. Okay, now we move on to we're now moving on to item 5 with the Southwestern Railway Timetable Consultation. So we'll do this in 2 phases or 3 phases. The first phase is Councillor Kennedy's question. And I don't know if there's an immediate response to Councillor Kennedy's question, to which again he's entitled to supplementary. So who'd like to give a first shot at the response to Councillor Kennedy?
I'm happy to respond if Matt's happy with that.
Yep. Thanks, David. Yeah, please.
Thank you. Yes, I think we're considering the full report in a few minutes, but in précis, which is possibly helpful, that the points raised by Mr. Kennedy and actually the petition by Mr. Matthews absolutely align with the concerns that we have with the proposals that Southwestern Railway have put forward. And I think in one hand we should take the consultation with Southwestern Railway in a positive light, that they're letting us engage with them at this stage well ahead of it becoming a fait accompli and actually trying to influence the change, but at the same time put our points across around what we find quite difficult in the consultation and the proposals, service frequency reductions and so forth. So when we consider the report shortly and the committee feedback to Matt and myself, that will form the basis or part of the basis of the formal response Matt's providing to Southwestern Railways tomorrow.
Thanks, David. Councillor Kennedy, want a quick response, and by all means listen in to what is going to be no doubt a vigorous discussion by the committee members, if you so wish. But any immediate comment you have?
Well, thank you very much, and I'm obviously very encouraged with that response. If I may, I will listen in. It's great to know that our concerns are shared. Just like to thank over 2,000 people who've signed the petition that we started, which particularly affects Epsom and Mill Valley. Look forward to a strong response. I guess the question is, are you specifically in touch with the affected councils as well, like Epsom and Mill Valley in particular, but I suppose other affected councils, local councils too?
My understanding, but perhaps I'm incorrect, is that the borough and district councils were also appraised of this consultation, and David is nodding. So somewhere in Mull Valley and in Epsom and in Elmbridge, there'll be a copy of this consultation, which I would encourage all members, whether a borough, district or county, we've only got a day or so to feed in your views vigorously. I'll leave it at that. Okay, thank you. Now we have the petition from Mr. Matthews. Again, maybe David. I think probably the answer to the petition, which will then take into the full, to have something to commend.
Are you having a nice time in the Isle of Wight, John?
No, unfortunately, I'm COVID. I'm on my last day of isolation, so I had to cancel my holiday. So I'm in deepest fellowship. Maybe meetings face to face do have something to commend. Right. Thank you very much. We're back on.
Are you having a nice time in the Isle of Wight?
No, unfortunately, I'm COVID. One of the perhaps the most alarming feature of the stuff that was presented to us from Southwestern Railway was their claim, and this has such a potential knock-on impact on our residents, that pre-pandemic, the commuting traffic will only return to about 60% of pre-pandemic levels. So the question is, or to colleagues, to the team, is: do you share that? What seems to be quite an arbitrary limit of 60%. And following on from that, if in fact the reality is that the figure is not 60% or 70%, that could lead to really quite serious overcrowding on trains, absent a revisiting or a relook at the timetable. So the question then is for Southwestern Railway is, if their figure proves to be inaccurate or too pessimistic, how quickly will they be able to respond to change and update the timetable such that our residents who have a bad enough deal with Southwestern Railways in commuting time anyway will not suffer further as a consequence of we see the problem now, we'll change it in 18 months' time when we do the next timetable. That is simply not good enough. So you can see where I'm coming from, and I'm interested whether Matt, Lucy, or David will share those fundamental concerns about some of the basic assumptions on which Southwestern Railways are operating.
Do you want to just come in there then, John? So just to let the rest of the committee know, John, as his capacity as chairman, myself and Tim Hall, along with Chris Grayling and Sir Paul Beresford, the two members of Parliament for the affected areas, did have a meeting with the rail operator. I think we can be quite honest and say it was a frank and robust conversation, mainly one direction on that from the participants. And as John, you've outlined, our concern was just that. It was the accuracy of their forecasting, the length of time that it would take if their forecasting was wrong in order to rectify and put additional capacity on. Because in normal reviews, it takes between 12 and 18 months for them to review that. So 3 months in and you realise it's gone horribly wrong. That's quite a long delay. They were reluctant, as I fully appreciate, because you do not want sort of empty trains just sitting, waiting for an eventual use, just to have them on standby. But we were really pushing them to say they had to have a very flexible approach if their forecasting turned out to be incorrect. In addition to that, it was the locality, i.e. the fact that the trains were being taken out from a very particular area. They said they were being broadly even across the southeast. However, 2 of the trains come from one area within Surrey, and that's mainly Bowl Valley and Epsom, which will have an impact particularly in peak hours. So the main drivers, I think we finally got them to admit, was the fact they had been given the budget by Treasury and told, there you go, right, that's what you've got, what are you going to deliver? And I think that's what we do need to address, because considering that the government's Bus Back Better programme is for us to get people to train stations on buses, actually not having the requisite number of trains that is needed doesn't exactly fit in with that. So I think you're quite right, John. What you said, we do align with, as with the petition comments and the comments that come before. It is a concern as we're opening up that they're basing this on estimates rather than based on just what they've surveyed their existing users. They did say, however, they're expecting leisure to bounce back pretty quickly. It's mainly actually just commuter traffic on the Monday and Friday, which is primarily our concern. Because if you look at the roads at the weekend, people are definitely out at the weekends, and they are busier at the weekends than during the week.
Sure. No, thanks, Matt, very much. Stephen. Estimates rather than Stephen Cooksey.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I was just tuning in. Yes, can I say a couple of things? I mean, first of all, fully, because the that the cuts that are being suggested affect Mole Valley District very badly and affect my own ward in Dorking very badly. I would like to see as strong a rebuttal of those proposals as possible coming from the county, because for all the reasons that we've already heard, and I don't, no point in repeating those because I support those fully, it really will have a very detrimental effect on the residents that I represent and residents in Mole Valley, and I think we need to stand up for that. And I'd like to see a very firm response from the county, taking full account of the three items that are set out in detail in the petition, particularly to indicate that these cuts in services will first of all affect residents very badly, and secondly will bring more cars onto the road. I think I said when we discussed this earlier that it would have been really helpful to have had in front of us the response that was coming from the county, so that we could actually know whether we would want to add to that or we would want to recommend a variation of that. And I would hope in future, when we're being asked for these things, it would be helpful to know in some detail what the county are proposing to suggest. I'd also add that Mole Valley at this very moment is writing a response as a consultee, and it would be helpful to know that the response that is coming from Mole Valley and the response from the county are aligned. Not quite sure how we achieve that, but it would be helpful to know that. My other comment just picks up the leisure issue, because services on Sundays particularly are really dreadful at the moment. This proposal will make them even worse, and I think there is a move very much to increase leisure activity in London. For example, theatres are opening on Sundays rather than on Mondays, and if we really are serious about keeping cars off the road and providing alternative forms of transport, and I think we need to take up that Sunday issue very, very clearly. Thanks, Chairman.
Thanks, Stephen. I'm sure on the first point that Stephen's mentioned about Mole Valley, I suspect the answer will be very powerfully in the affirmative, and then perhaps spend a little bit more time on Stephen's second question about leisure. If anybody would like to come back on that.
Serious about keeping cars off the road.
I think the point is, John, is that particularly with the consultation response, we wanted the select committee to have all of their comments, so that once we can add them into the consultation response that we will put forward, we will share it as early as possible once after this meeting, once we've got everyone's comments included. So then districts and boroughs, if they wanted to use that as a template, they can do so, and also councillors if they want to put in individual responses.
Thank you very much. Stephen's second question about leisure and the impact. Do we have a single spokesperson from Matt, Lucy, or David? It could be Matt, but if there's an immediate comment, we could add that to the recommendations. It seems a perfectly sensible idea for me to add, the concern about leisure. But
yes, we can do that, John. I mean, as with our rail strategy, we are constantly pushing for improved services to go through, whether it is in commuter peak hours or actually at the weekends as well. If we're going to do this shift into sustainable travel, it needs to be on all levels. It can't just be walking, cycling. It must be the buses where we're doing the investment, and it must also be rail. I think now that it is nationalised, might give them a little bit more flexibility, but we probably will need that conversation with the Treasury rather than with the operator itself.
Sure. Thanks, Matt. Stephen, by all means, come back later. Good number of colleagues now wanting to contribute. So first Andy, and then Jordan, then Catherine. So Andy.
Thanks, Chairman. I'd like to make a general point first and then a couple of specific points. The general point is I think it's rather extraordinary that this consultation, the rail users are not in the list of stakeholders. You'd think that the people who would give the most useful comments on timetable changes would be the rail users. I used to be a commuter myself, and I would, if I was a commuter now, I would take exception to the fact they weren't consulting me on it. So, and that puts particular responsibility now, in my view, on the councils, both the county council and the borough councils, to speak on behalf of our rail users. So that's a general point I would make to that. It's not Surrey's fault. It's the fault of the South West Trains. The more specific points, I've been asked to speak on behalf of Epsom and Ewell, as Jan Mason, who's an Epsom and Ewell councillor, isn't able to make this meeting. They apparently have some of the busiest commuter lines, rather similar to Mull Valley, that go through places like Ewell West and Stoneleigh. And apparently their proposals to cut the peak hour services from, I think, 4 trains an hour to 2, which seems a bit extraordinary. And then I believe from Eber Kingston, who's one of the other local councillors there, that they've actually issued some comments to rail users locally, suggesting that rail users should, at the busiest time, use other services. And people are a bit puzzled by what that means, actually. What other services? Are they supposed to travel to other stations or something like that? Or you try to go on different lines? That's not part of this consultation, but that information's been apparently given out locally. And again, that seems an odd thing to suggest. So I think we should respond on behalf of the rail users on these points. As a Farnham councillor, I'd like to make a couple of points, if I may. There was a new service introduced by South West Trains when they won the franchise, a direct service between Farnham and Guildford. And that's welcome in many ways, because it take travel off the A31, which is the road, the main road connecting the two services. But in fact, because of the pandemic, partly, I guess, that service is, and even before the pandemic, actually, that service is little used during the day. It's actually used quite a lot during the peak hours, but during the day it travels fairly empty, even before the pandemic, and that's actually causing problems. We have a rail crossing in Farnham, which is one of the main pinch points in the town, causes all sorts of traffic problems. So we've got these empty trains travelling during the day, holding up road traffic. And I think Southwestern Trains should be asked to consider having less frequent trains during the day, during the less busy times. Although the services at the peak hour are obviously welcome. A final point I'd make, actually, and this is really, it's just a general comment for the future. In terms of that service would be far more useful if there was a station beside the Royal Surrey Hospital in Guildford. And that's been an issue that's been kicking around for years, and just not really to do with this consultation. But I'll make the point that both Guildford and Farnham councillors will welcome that being looked into as a future investment in rail services and make that service much more useful. Thanks, Chairman.
Thanks, Anne. We don't, because this is a kind of different kind of meeting where we put officers on the spot. This is, an opportunity in a sense for us to make policy. That's not to, and Andy's made a number of points there. So if Matt or David or Lucy would want to respond to any of Andy's points, do so. But I'm not sure necessarily Andy is necessarily expecting a particular response on the subject he's raised. But so. I mean, and the longer the shorter the dialogue, the more we can get colleagues in.
That's fine, John. I think David will do that, but I'm happy to respond on the rail station in Guildford and other bits.
Okay.
So I'll just pick up the points on Epsom and Ewell and Stoneleigh, Ewell West. One of the things we'll have read in the consultation, of course, and in the report, is that some of these changes being proposed by Southwestern Railway are predicated upon southern services picking up some of the alternative travel demands, taking you not to Waterloo, but to other stations. Now, that's not such a bad thing, but it's disbenefit, no doubt. And what we have to be mindful of as a council is that Southwestern Railway may just be the first train operating company having this strategic review. And we put ourselves in a much more difficult place when a southern review comes along. So Epsom and Ewell, I know, are responding to the consultation. I've been in contact with an officer there. And I'm sure that our response, the County Council response, will be picking up very strongly these points. Maybe not so much the point about the Farnham to Guildford service. I'm afraid I'll let Matt talk about the Guildford West point. I will just make the reference to leisure traffic, of course. Much of the impact of these proposals is off-peak travel, which I think is sometimes leisure travel. And you won't get much leisure travel from Bookham with a train every hour. Or West Humble, perhaps. Anyway, I'll hand over to Matt and Guildford West.
Thanks, David.
Thanks, David. Thanks, John. So, Andy, the train station, Guildford's actually identified in its local plan 2 train stations, one next to the Royal Surrey and then one next to the Merry Depot, actually. So that is in there. Guildford Borough Council has reaffirmed its commitment to want to see that come forward. And I know when I left the Borough Council, it was at grip stage, I think it was 4, which is just before it was handed over to Network Rail for construction. So I think, fingers crossed, the commitment is still there from all parties. I imagine it's now just a point at when Network Rail are aiming to start delivering with the funding available.
Excellent. Thanks, Matt. And happy Andy makes a happy committee, so he's smiling broadly. That's great. Jordan.
Thank you, Chairman. I just find the timing of this consultation really wrong because we've just come out the summer season. Rail travel has actually picked up quite a lot. I believe GTR, another operator in Surrey, is saying their levels are recovered to 80% pre-pandemic. And we're only in the second week, or coming into the third week of September. So I just really struggle to understand how we can make a permanent change to the timetable based on such little data. And I'm also just wondering what conversations we have as a council with Southwestern Railway, because we really need a close working relationship with them in order to achieve our rail plan and the transport plan we're trying to implement in Surrey. But I'm just wondering how much input we have into the timetabling. Perhaps we should be working with the DFT. And also, as it moves into Great British Railways, we need to ask for more input into the rail service. So I was wondering if we will be writing to the Department for Transport, perhaps, and emphasising these points to them, as they are actually in control of the service specification as part of the contract.
Thanks, John. Good questions. David, Lucy, Matt?
I'll take the start of that, and thank you. I quite agree with the timing. I quite agree with I think we all agree about the data that SWR are using to generate stats around how many people return to work. Over the last 18 months, I've changed my mind every month about when I'm going to go back to the office and when I feel good about it and when I don't feel good about it. So I find it difficult to understand how SWR can take this information from their season ticket holders, and they will have changed their mind, I'd have thought, because I imagine I'm fairly representative of the working population. So yes, it will require further conversation with SWR. We do have a fantastic working relationship with SWR. They've come to us, they use us as a sounding board. And I firmly believe that what this really is the start of a better conversation. Matt has already mentioned going to the Treasury and speaking with DFT Rail. We're doing some fairly ground-moving work over at Longcross with new rail services having gone in there. We are working on station improvement programmes, and SWR were very supportive of the rail strategy for Surrey that Matt took to Cabinet in March. So I think in terms of relationships, we're in a good place. However, that doesn't secure us services. So I think that's a key point that we have to make and take advantage of this early consultation.
Okay, thanks, David. Is that okay, Jordan? Yeah, colleagues, if you want to cover a supplementary, assuming time is on our side, then more than happy for colleagues to have supplementaries to questions. But if Jordan's okay with that answer, we'll move to Catherine and then Jonathan. Catherine.
Thank you. David's already touched on this, but it's the idea of the what are the other rail operators in Surrey doing, and do we have equally good relationships with them? Has anybody asked them, Southern Rail, for example, if they're about to go through a timetable revision process, and are they likewise talking to other train operators? Just if you can comment on that. That'd be great.
Thank you.
Rail operators in Surrey doing, and do we have equally good relationships?
Thank you. If I pick that one up again, if you may. We have excellent relationship with Southern, and we have an excellent relationship with GTR on the North Downs line. Of course, they're part of the same first group, and there's a sort of overlap of management there. No, nobody's been in touch with us to say that they're going to have a strategic review of the network. Southwestern Railway never forewarned us on it. The day I found out was the day every member found out when it landed in their inbox. So, but I think it's inevitable for the points we've made earlier, and it means that we are better placed, and it's going to be a lot more difficult for Southern and GTR to come up with changes to frequency and all the rest based on members are warmed up to it all.
Thanks, David. Catherine, over to you if you want a supplementary. You can always come back afterwards if you've got another question seizes you by the moment, as it were. Jonathan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, everyone. I've got a question in respect of our existing new rail strategy for Surrey. As I understand it, the Cabinet adopted that strategy back in March, and I wonder whether you had been given a heads up or you had even been made aware of the details of this timetable at the time that you considered that strategy. If so, does the strategy reflect what is likely to change? If not, and you weren't informed beforehand, are you now looking to revisit that strategy that you put back or put through earlier this year? Thank you.
If I go first, Matt may wish to come in as well. When the strategy was written and approved by Cabinet in March, Southwestern Railways were involved in our development of that strategy. There was absolutely no knowledge at that time of this consultation and the proposed December 2022 timetable changes. I firmly believe as an officer that Southwestern Railway didn't know that was going to be the case, and bearing in mind it was in June that the government developed and announced GB Railway or GB Rail and took control of the network, as it were. Now, in terms of the rail strategies as a tool, it's a really important document to let us to continue to lobby the rail industry and to lobby government for change. And I have to say that was one of the primary drivers for preparing and approving the strategy. We have this way forward, and we can develop and establish what's good for the county and what's good for the government. So while it's disappointing what we're talking about today, I think we are well placed as an authority to go and have that conversation over the next few months. And as I say, Matt alluded to that earlier. Thank you.
Thank you. Jonathan, do you want to come back?
Thank you, David. I reserve my right to come back a little bit later if I might. Thank you, Chair.
Of course you do. But at the moment, there are no other speakers. So whilst you brood another question, I'll intervene because I have one myself. And it's been alluded to, in the petition and in the questions, but not been as explicitly stated as I'm going to do now. And that is our climate change agenda. And everything implicit in the LTP and our transport is to get our residents as much as we can without nagging them, etc., off their car into public transport. What is a clean form of public transport? The railway system. And here we are. Here, Southwestern Railways at peak times for heaven's sake, as well as at leisure times, proposing to reduce services, and Stephen Cooksey mentioned earlier, including in leisure time. So again, I hope it's a question to which the answer will be a resounding yes. That the county also has very strong reservations about the proposals in the consultation because it will potentially have quite a serious knock-on effect on our own councils, Surrey County Council, and our residents' commitment to an active, successful, and sustainable climate change strategy. So, I mean, again, I hope I'm kind of speaking to the choir, as it were, but preaching to the choir. But it would be useful if Matt or David or Lucy could confirm that they share those concerns.
I think we're quite happy to say, and safe to say, absolutely, John. And as I mentioned earlier, with the Bus Back Better, we've all got our climate change targets and everything else. The reduction in any form of sustainable transport, peak hour or off-peak hour, such as trains, is at odds with whatever we or the government are trying to do.
Yeah.
So I think that's a fair point. I don't envy the government because they've got to balance the national debt following the unusual couple of years that we've had with COVID. But we can't sort of come out of COVID and then go, right, we're back to normal habits of everyone just getting their car onto the road. It needs to be, this is our chance to get that step change. So I think the response will be extremely robust, as you're aware with our meeting. Even our MPs as well were extremely robust. Even Chris Grayling, who I think was particularly annoyed at the proposals, considering he granted them the franchise in the first place that they're now going back on. So yes, it will be a very strong response on climate change as well.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thanks, Matt.
John,
yes,
if I may just come in from an officer's perspective, absolutely, it's integral thinking about the Surrey Transport Plan and all the different ambitions we have in there. You know, sustainable travel is at the heart of that, really, and we need to have those options. So absolutely support the argument that this is sort of kind of really a hindrance in that aspect.
We'll take Kath. Thank you very much, Lucy. Catherine can come in, and then I think we. After our pre-meeting, we suggested some recommendations that Matt might, and hopefully there'll be unanimity. We no doubt after, as a consequence of some of the discussions, Kunwa in the background will be amending those suggested recommendations. But after Catherine has spoken, perhaps it would be helpful to put the sort of draft recommendations on the screen for colleagues, and we can spend just a few minutes, not too long, I hope, refining them as necessary or adding to them as appropriate, and hopefully they will provide not only the building blocks but the substance of Matt's subsequent letter back to SWR. But Catherine first, and then we'll move on. Thanks, Catherine.
Thank you. It was just a question about the incentives on the all the train operators, and this is something probably for lobbying in central government, but are they incentivized to, as a priority, to get trains on time, or are they being incentivized to increase their numbers of passengers? Because they've shown during the pandemic that if they run fewer trains, they hit their targets of being on time. But that's not supporting our aims for climate change, or anybody's aims for climate change. I don't know if anybody can speak about their incentives, or as a priority to get trains on time.
Thanks, Catherine. Any immediate response?
We're not aware of the agreement between the government and the train equipment companies, but one of the key measures is rail reliability, isn't it? That's what is always talked about, not the 85 million passengers that travel through Surrey annually pre-pandemic. But it's the fine balance just now around reliability with the introduction of new rolling stock, the 19 new arterial high-capacity trains that Southwestern Railways are going to introduce and are saying is a great thing. Well, that's a franchise commitment anyway, a pre-pandemic franchise commitment that will help deliver reliability improvements. And these are trains that will operate on the suburban lines down through Guildford and Dorking and so forth and so on. But yes, they have to get that balance right of running trains on time and ensuring it's attractive to encourage us all to start and return to the public transport network.
Thank you. Thanks, Catherine and David. Mark Sugden. Mark. And then we will move, if we can, to consider our...
Thank you, Chairman. Just to follow up on what Catherine said, one of the questions that we're asked to give an answer to, question 7, do you agree with our strategic approach that seeks to balance future performance with cost control? And the point is, other than a little bit of reference to the 2021 May contract, are we in a position to even answer that? Because I don't think there's a lot of transparency about exactly how they're incentivised. and their overall budget, at least not that I can see in the consultation document. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Who'd like to? Mark's read the consultation document to a fine tooth comb and puts us all to shame. But so it's a great point. David,
John, if I may, I think it's another. I think it's a bit of a disingenuous question, actually, not from Mark, from Southwestern Railways, isn't it?
okay.
Because we're not in a position to comment on that. Do we agree with the strategic review and how that balances how it impacts the passenger in Surrey? So I don't think we have sight of that, and as an officer, I don't have sight of that. And if that's an exam question, well, I'm afraid I've failed it. I think we need much more information to do that. I think that's an example of they count the yeses and nos when they get all the feedback in, rather than actually the correct answers to go back with asking another question, really, I believe.
Thank you, David. Excellent response. Okay, thanks, colleagues. If Kunwa, our intrepid DEM service officer, who has been, like all of us, listening in to the discussion, could perhaps, there we go, share some of the recommendations and expand the screen, because I can't read all that. Plus, I don't know, Kunwa, if you've amended or added in any recommendations as a consequence of our 45 minutes discussion. Anyway, colleagues will give you 3 or 4 minutes or 2 or 3 minutes to read through that, and it's gone again.
Is it okay? 1 second, sorry.
Sorry.
All right, can you see it now?
That's fine. As a consequence of our 45 minutes discussion. Anyway, colleagues will give you 3 or 4 minutes to, or 2 or 3 minutes to. And Matt, by all means, so since this is one where we're in alliance, if there's anything that you'll be the one who's sending it in your name, do contribute. Stephen has and then Mark. So Stephen first. On mute, Stephen.
I think I'm with you now. Thanks, Chairman. Item 4. I think there is. I think we all agree that there is insufficient evidence to justify the proposals to make the cuts that are recommended for Epsom and Moore Valley, and I'd like to see that strengthened to take account of the petition which we discussed earlier. And I'd like to see us actually saying that we would want them to abandon the proposals and to restore the services to pre-pandemic levels, because effectively, if the evidence isn't there for them to do what they're suggesting to do, I think we should be very firm in saying that they shouldn't do it.
Okay, thank you. We'll come back to it in the round. Mark has also indicated a wish. Over to you, Mark.
Thank you, Sharon. My understanding is that this consultation covers Mondays through Saturdays and doesn't include Sunday. But per what Councillor Cooksey said, Sunday is extraordinarily important, I think, and even more so than going forward. So maybe that should be a separate point about we really want to be consulted on a Sunday timetable whenever that occurs. And we strongly encourage that services are at least maintained, if not increased, given what we believe will be a significant increase in leisure travel.
Okay. That sounds pretty reasonable to me. If we could add something to words to that effect. Hello. Yes. Who wants to speak?
Point 6. We can strengthen in light of comments around Sunday, although it does address the Sundays as well as leisure provision and the peak time travel.
Jonathan.
Thank you, Chair. Just in terms of the first point, Roman numeral 1, given the comments made by colleagues about the data, and the concerns we have around its accuracy, I wonder whether saying simply the council is concerned about the rigour of the prediction is strong enough. A concern suggests that we're not angry, or that we perhaps might accept the outcome. I wonder whether we should strengthen the wording to say, for example, the council challenges the rigour of the prediction, or perhaps even going further and say the council does not accept the prediction of 60% pre-pandemic levels. I throw it out here as a suggestion, but I think the word concern needs to be replaced with something stronger.
I think challenges is a better way of putting it, rather than going outright, we don't accept it. Speaking personally, but challenges I'd be very happy with.
Yes, because I would say we don't have the evidence, Jonathan, to counter that particular claim. So,
excuse me. Okay, no, well, thanks, colleagues, very much indeed. I think we're, with the amendments that have been suggested by colleagues now, I hope, unless anyone indicates the contrary, that those are the recommendations, or that we will ask Matt to incorporate in his formal response on behalf of the county to SWR. So on that basis, thank you very much. A very useful, and I hope for our residents, productive and valuable contribution. And I thank the petitioner and the questioners. I think we're all on the same page on this one. So thank you very much indeed. Right, excellent. We now move on to item 6. We're doing well on time. That's that's what we want. So we've got procurement of highways term maintenance contract. Thank you for a very rigorous report. Much appreciated. We'll go back to our normal case. If Katie or any of the team want to make a very short, because we've all read it in detail, we're chewing all over it, but by all means make a short introductory statement, and then we'll go on to questions. So
I'll take that. Thank you, Chair. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Lucy. Over to you.
Very quickly, this is about an update about an exciting time that's been happening in highways, and we're getting very close to the end. So pleased to be able to share with you an update on that progress. It really is about getting the right provider for Surrey to achieve what we need to achieve, our ambitions and our aims, and we've tried to cover that throughout. We are talking about themes rather than specifics, given where we are, but hopefully we can kind of address that as best we can. And I suppose what the important thing for us to mention is that this will be a new contract, regardless of the provider who's there, whether it's our existing or a different one. This will be a new contract. So we're talking about it in terms of a new contract. So just to make that clear up front. And I'll stop there, if I may, Chair.
Wonderful. You get the Chair's prize for brevity and power at the same time. Well done. Thanks, Lucy. Okay, I'll start off, and hopefully I'll be just as brief. Okay, so we've got this new contract. Our residents will be expecting, significant and substantial and measurable improvements, to particularly on, the bane of our lives, on potholes, on the timing of their reporting and the quality, everything right first time. The other element which drives out all of us mad is three potholes, 2 of which kind of meet the criteria. The one just next door just doesn't do it, and it's left until the system brings it round again. So, on behalf of 1 million Surrey residents, I'll ask the question, if you can, as specifically as you can, what are our residents going to see as demonstrable improvements to the road surfacing, to the stuff that drives them all mad as a consequence of this new contract?
Okay, fabulous. That's no pressure on me then. So
not at all.
What we're very aware of the sense around potholes from the public, and we live and breathe it and have looked at this so many times. So let me just start by just saying that we are very aware. So what we've tried to do is give a really clear focus for any provider who's coming to work with us, that right first time, and we mean right first time, so turning up, doing a permanent repair that makes sense to people, that will last, and is good value is what we're after. So we've been really clear in our messaging. That's the approach we're after here. And what we've seen from the providers is some different solutions across the piece, but they all understand the right first time. We are looking at perhaps different options around different materials or different way of fixing defects. So that may mean kind of more environmentally sustainable materials. It may mean different options to treat larger areas of repair. So you're addressing your point of, not just turning up to do one or the other, and looking at how we best schedule doing that so that we aren't leaving defects on the network any longer than they need to. Now, this is an ever improving area and a subject we'll forever be looking at, I'm sure. So the demonstrable bit, I suppose at the start, what we hope to see is some very clear changes in our approach, which is thinking about the different materials and options we can and whether we can do more at the first visit. What we will need to do over time is to see how we can continue to improve that, because we do have, policies to consider the safety and risks and other factors like that. So sometimes that does get in the way of us doing everything we would want to at that first visit, but it won't be for the want of trying. So I'm hopeful that answers the question. It goes back to the right first time and how they might approach that. So, yeah.
Thanks, Lucy.
Chairman, if I can.
Sorry, Matt. Yeah, please.
Sorry, Joe, but it also means that we do need to keep up our investment into the highway network to stop the potholes appearing in the first place. So the fact that we are resurfacing so many roads and actually putting them back into the condition they need to be for our higher level of traffic that we have on our highways, actually, then, as Lucy says, we need the right first time, but we also need to keep that level of investment in to prevent it happening in the first place.
Absolutely. And this committee at budget time will be on the case and fully supporting you for increased resources. Paul.
Thank you. First of all, just want to agree with everything that's just been said so far, particularly what Matt's just said there. I think that the report is right to highlight and put emphasis on this right first time thing, because it is so important. However, there is more to our highways maintenance than potholes. And I know that is key on people's minds. We had an enormous problem with it a few years ago. And I do believe it is getting better. I really do. I love this AI technology that identifies it and all the rest of it. All great stuff. But I just want to go back to some of the things that John O'Reilly said, our beloved chairman, on the quality control, because with the best will in the world, with the best contractors in the world, that's not going to happen every time, getting it right first time. There are going to need to be subsequent visits and all the rest of it. And I think really what residents say to me over and over again is what processes are in place to quality check these things, spot checks on the work and everything else. So that's my first question. Can you tell me what exactly you intend to do in terms of quality checking? And that needs to be by highways officers, not the contracts themselves. They don't need to be marking their own work. We need to be doing it, kind of thing. So that's my first question.
Paul, let's let the team answer your first question, and then we'll go to your second question.
Okay. Yeah, all right. I'll answer that one if that's okay, Chairman and Paul. So we've got a number of measures built into some of our existing processes, but we are strengthening those. So as a starting point, the contractors are required to take photos of the work they're doing in progress. So when they arrive at the defect, so we would have taken information when we recorded it in the first place, when it was inspected. We then require them to take a photo when they start, often while they're doing the work, so that we can get a view of what's happening, so whether they're doing it properly halfway through, and then when they finish, to show that the work's been completed. That information is recorded for every single defect that's repaired and is uploaded into the works ordering system, and we have complete access to that, so that's a complete open system to us to check. We then have a dedicated team of officers in the compliance function that are pretty much solely focused on looking at the inspection process and the repair of defects. And so they will take a sample of those defects each month, and that's a random sample that we generate, so it's not provided to us as a curated list of his or our best, if you like. So we have complete access to that, and they're qualified inspectors themselves, so they can determine those things. So they'll do a series of desktop audits, but they'll also actually go out and physically check some of those sites as well to make sure they're done. So it's a mixture of things, and if we see a higher than expected number of poor quality things, we will start to increase the volume that we sample. But what we do with that information is that's then fed back straight into monthly meetings with the service provider teams that are doing the work to actually look at, well, what's going well, because I can't stress enough the importance of recognising where things have gone well as much as we look at what's not worked, because then we can learn from what. So that's feeding in all the time. So and Paul, you talked about your belief that things have been improving, and so that's a contributing factor to that. We also, as many of you will know, have a laboratory within the council who carry out testing, and so whilst a lot of their work will, to be fair, be led by the capital programmes, they do undertake some of the testing in relation to some of this work as well. So we've got that, and so that's the processes we employ to drive that, and then the information is sort of fed up through the governance process as well, so we can see that at a higher tier of how we're performing on that.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks,
back to you,
Paul.
Paul.
Yeah. Do you want me to come back on that next one very quickly, John?
Yeah.
Well, it says in the report, I forget which bit, about social value projects. And I'd just be very keen to know, because that sounds really nice. That's a nice buzzword, but what does it actually mean, and what will that look like? Thank you.
So I'll come in on this, and other colleagues might want to jump on. So we were really keen. One of our golden threads in the procurement was this wasn't just about, business as usual, fixing stuff. One of the key themes we had in there was how can we do more, and social value and the greener futures and innovation and a few other things are kind of, golden threads we've included. So going to your question, social value, what we've asked each of the bidders to do is provide us some kind of examples of what that might look like, and then how it might grow over the years. So each are quite different. If I talk about some of the stuff that we're doing at the moment, then that helps to give you a flavour perhaps of what those things might be. So we have, for example, a kind of a social skills training course at the moment with Kia, our current provider. So what that means is we engage with young adults who are kind of not in employment, education or training, and we offer them a placement, a dedicated training course for 2 weeks, I think 2 or 3 weeks, where they can get some kind of recognised highway accreditation, and then we can, if they are successful and they are so inclined and want to pursue it, we can offer a placement on the contract or with one of our supply chain. So that's one example where we're kind of using the skills we have, if you like, to provide a wider social value. Other examples that the industry might have is like social enterprise arrangements. So there's like sign making, sort of these social enterprises where they are providing a service which we can then use. So the other kind of social value we have done recently is set up the Surrey Infrastructure Academy. So this again is where providers have come together with Surrey educational facilities to develop a course, to offer training in the world of highways engineering, so we can kind of educate the workforce for the future. So that's perhaps some examples of what we're doing at the moment. Some of those we may see, continuing in a different format, but there's a big scope. As I said, we've asked them to think about what options can they do, and very much what will end up within Surrey will be something which will be right for Surrey. So it's right that it develops when it arrives, because we have different demographics, we have different issues that we might want to tackle. So it's as much as about the framework that sits around it that we can then kind of use to the best of our ability. Apologies for my dog.
That's all great stuff. That's all great stuff, Lucy. All I would say is I think it's really important that we publicise those things and let the community know what we're doing. And I appreciated your dog there. Definitely a sign of our virtual times, and really enjoyed that. Thank you.
I think we'll make the canine a next witness, so we can get good answers from Lucy's hound. Thanks, Paul. Andy McLeod. Andy.
Thanks, John. Lucy, you've answered John's question, Paul's points about potholes in terms of quality and that sort of thing, getting it right first time. But the other issue that really sort of annoys the general public is potholes tend to often occur in groups, don't they? You get 3 or 4 together, and perhaps 2 of them reach the level where they're due to be repaired under the contract, and 2 others aren't quite at that level. So you get 2 repaired out of 4, the other 2 are left, and then a few weeks later they've deteriorated to the level they should be repaired, and the contractors come back and repair them. And that just seems to go against common sense from the point of view of the residents. You know, why on earth did you not repair them all in the first place? And I know that's difficult because you've got a legal contract, and the contractors are obliged to repair potholes above a certain level or something like that. But it really does annoy the public, and it's a difficult problem to deal with. The second thing that really annoys the public, and this is particularly the case in Farnham actually, is where you have roadworks sitting there with nobody doing anything. And Farnham is a place where they've got a medieval road system, and it's very easy to block up the whole town by a couple of roadworks on the edge of the town, or even sometimes just somebody parking badly. But when you have roadworks with nobody doing anything, and the town is completely congested, that incredibly annoys the public. And again, I know that's difficult because there's lots of reasons why roadworks can be sitting there doing nothing for no apparent good reason. But people say, why can't you do more in the evening, that sort of thing? Why can't you make sure that these people work all the time and don't disappear? Or why are they sitting there doing nothing in their vans? It's just a very, very difficult second problem, yeah? And a completely different tack, actually. A couple of my colleagues have commented on the contracts in terms of, we've got Ernest Mallet, who's one of the longest serving councillors, and he's always on about bureaucracy, Ernest, and so on. And he says that the sort of contracts that Surrey tend to engage in or arrange with contractors tend to be 3,000 pages long, incredibly complex, difficult to understand, and lead to a lot of disputes about whether the contractor's doing the right thing. He's saying we should have more simple contracts that are easier to understand, that are much clearer. And Catherine Powell, who's one of my other colleagues, who's got a lot of personal experience in contracts in her day job, she says similar things, that there's plenty of standard contracts around that are well proven, that you know, won't lead to these sort of disputes. Now, you might well have all this in hand with your negotiations with contractors, but I thought I'd just make the point, as 2 of my colleagues have made it. So, sorry, I've asked about 3 questions there, but if you don't mind addressing them. Thanks, John.
Thanks, Andy.
Okay. I mean, I go back to the sort of perhaps the earlier comments I made on potholes. We do understand that's an issue. I think, as you kind of highlighted, there are some issues in tackling everything at the same time. But what we are trying to do is figure out how to do more at the same visit, or how we might combine that. Now, what we probably need to do is better explain what we're doing, and I think that kind of leads on to a bit of your second point as well there, when we're talking about defect repairs, or you know, when we're coming back, or this might be a temporary repair, because we can't schedule everything to happen immediately because our network's so busy. It kind of doesn't always allow for that. So I think there's something in tackling more potholes in one go, which definitely feels to me about better scheduling. It goes back to Matt's earlier point, the cabinet member's earlier point about the levels of investment we have and what type of activities we're going to do. So we may need to broaden the types of treatments we do across our network to be able to be more flexible about those areas which feel like they're a bit more of a patchwork quilt, or you know, whether there's a better way of dealing with the risk. So I think at this stage, I need to kind of give you a commitment that we will continue to look at how we reduce that issue, which I do appreciate is one that is in the forefront of people's minds. In terms of the roadworks saying they're not doing anything, I mean, this is sort of blending across to the wider issue of utilities and other operators on the network. We have, we're trying to do what we can around better coordination there, and so lane rental is a kind of much broader aspect there, which hopefully helps us, not for all of our roads, but hopefully helps us and may encourage a bit more night working, or it may encourage a bit more joint working actually, so we're doing more at the same visit. I think what we are looking at in the new contract is improvements to coordination of our schemes and different activities. Part of the reducing the carbon agenda is at least visits in one go, really. So there's another incentive there for the suppliers to try and do more in one visit. So whether that means we completely eradicate traffic management that's sitting on the network, probably not, but actually it's chipping away at doing that, and it sends the message. And equally, we need to then be messaging, perhaps think about the options we have to communicate or put signs up to say why a site is left as it is if it's part of our works. So these are all things which there are features of in terms of how we improve. So hopefully that's encouraging. On the bureaucracy point, I'm pleased to say that we haven't had too many disputes in our existing contract over the terms that I've certainly been involved. So my sense is that, the contract we have is a recognised standard contract. We aren't kind of creating our own special arrangements here. We operate the ways of working, and the process should be clear enough, really, that we aren't needing to revert back to the contract every day or on a very frequent basis, because if we've done our job right, everybody knows what they're doing and knows the parameters, and the governance will help support that. So I'm not so concerned that we've got a very bureaucratic approach. As I said, the history of lack of disputes doesn't really support that, but we do need that protection, because we are talking about activities which do have a health and safety implication for workforce and the public, really, ourselves, and we do need to maintain that high level of service that our residents expect in highways. So we do need some protection there, but hopefully that answers.
Thanks, Lucy. Thanks, Andy. Well, we've got 6 colleagues. Inevitably, this is a very popular subject. So let's start with start with Stephen.
We do need that protection, because we are talking about activities which do.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I'd just like to raise a general question about the contract. If I recall rightly, when the current contract was negotiated, we gave it to a company which was very shortly afterwards subject to a takeover. And I think that that the number of potential companies that could undertake the work that we have in this contract is much more limited now than it was when we negotiated the last contract. Therefore, our area of choice is limited as well. And I know that other major authorities have hit the same problem, and some of them have considered seriously taking the whole package back in-house. And I just wondered whether, in fact, any consideration had been given to taking the package back in-house, and if it had, why didn't we pursue that any further?
Good question. Thanks, Stephen. Probably easier to start from how we determined the model, but I can assure you that it was certainly considered as one of the options. But when we started looking at the contract about three and a half years ago, and I think we've included elements of this in the introduction of the report, but it was generally considered that our current arrangements were working broadly quite well, and that we were looking to improve on those. And some of the key things that we were looking to improve on, aside from what we've talked about around traffic management and defect management and stuff, was actually some of the wider opportunities around things like social value. The Greener Futures agenda and strategy was starting to come as an idea. We'd started this work, I think, around 6 months before we declared the climate emergency. And so there were a number of strategic ambitions that we were looking at, that we wanted to make sure that the contract, when we came to the new contract arrangements, would help us fulfil some of those. I'm going to say they're not obligations, but ambitions. And so that was our starting point. We then looked at what all the various models were, and that included everything from completely insourcing the contract, partly insourcing, or a complete outsource, which might have included outsourcing some of the officers as well, which has been done in the past in other authorities. So we had a real spectrum of opportunity, and we undertook, I think it was about 18 months worth of work, internal workshops, external workshops. We had, obviously, I don't think you were, I'm not sure if you're on it, Stephen, I don't think you were, but we had a member reference group working with us alongside that we were reporting back into and on progress as we went through that process. And I think the key outcome was that to achieve the ambitions of the what I would call additionality of things like, say, sort of a greener futures agenda, innovation and improvement, really lended itself to working with a larger provider covering a majority of services, and then using the best sort of skills and resources that the council has, but also the best of those that the market provides as well. And so that was what determined the route that we went down. I would say I think we were quite, I'm not going to say lucky actually, I think we were successful in engaging the market very well. We were, in part of our pre-market engagement, identified with other authorities that in some cases certain organisations had got to the end of the process with only 2 bidders in the process, whereas we've maintained and have had 3 very strong responses, and we've seen, I think we had 6 bidders start the process back sort of this time last year. So to actually have achieved that and maintained the involvement of those 3 bidders when they have to invest quite substantial sums in their resources is actually an achievement that we're quite proud of.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Stephen, for the question. Jonathan.
Thank you, Chair. Just if I could change direction somewhat and focus a bit on governance and operational excellence. So on paragraph 36 of the report, you reference that. And what I would like to understand from you is, given the length of contract that you're looking to give, I think it's 10 years to be extended to 21 years, as I understand it, a good length of time. What provisions are you negotiating, or can you give us some insight into provisions around dispute resolution and also termination provisions? What can we do to bring this contract to an end should this operator or operators fail in their contractual obligations owed to us in this county? Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. So I suppose when it comes down to ultimately, in the worst case scenario, we have the option to terminate the contract and move to an alternative provider. The impact of doing that would be absolutely substantial and would not be done lightly. But there is a huge amount of activities and structures and mechanisms that get in place long before we get to that point. So we talk about governance, and so we currently have a structure that we're looking to expand and build upon. So at the moment we have officers who are looking at, we talked about the compliance team, for example, who are involved in checking the day-to-day quality of defect repairs. So that information is then fed into a scrutiny board, which is chaired by one of our level 5 officers, but incorporates members both of the operational teams, but also the management teams and supervisors, and they're accountable for looking at both qualifying that data and the performance, but also looking for those opportunities for improvement, seeking support from the senior teams. And then we have one of those boards for a number of different areas. So all the service areas have scrutiny boards. So the idea is that we're empowering operational officers to sort of oversee and manage the day-to-day activity, but they're not alone. So they then feed into we call it the monthly contract review at the moment, which at the moment is chaired by Richard Bolton. I'm sure many of you know, and in my new role, I will be picking that up in the future. And that's really looking at elements of the operational performance. We'll also incorporate, health and safety performance and financial performance, and make sure we're paying our bills on time, we're receiving our bills on time, that they're right and are challenged, and so on and so forth. That then will itself feed up to what's called a core group, which will be chaired by Lucy and will incorporate other group managers. And then finally, we'll have a strategic board, which will meet between every 6 and 12 months, and that will incorporate both cabinet member and Katie as executive director to be part of that. And similarly, at all of those levels, there'll be an equivalent members from the service provider teams as well. So we're sort of got a tiered accountability, and those more senior meetings, I've always felt that they can very easily fall by the wayside if you don't feel like there's something to discuss. However, when you really need them to be effective, you need to have strong relationships, and so it's really important to maintain the frequency of those meetings, build those relationships, so that when we do get problems, and absolutely a contract of this nature for this long with this complexity, there will always be problems. So actually what we need to do is have the right mindset and the relationships to actually work through them together. But I suppose ultimately, circling back to the point that you asked at the beginning, Jonathan, in the end, if everything gets to that point, we do have the option, if we really needed to terminate the contract.
Thanks, Paul. Okay with that, Jonathan?
Yeah, I would just say, Chair, that those tiers of responsibility is something that I would be supportive of. I can see the sense in that for a number of different reasons. However, ultimately, it is a contract. It is a set of terms, conditions and obligations that we owe them, and critically, the operator would owe us. And we need to have clear terms stipulated so that ultimately, if there is an issue of a breakdown, the parties can look to the detail in those agreements. That's all I would say, and I'm pleased that you are aware of that, and will include dispute resolution provisions as well as termination provisions should it be necessary to exercise down the line.
Thank you.
If I can just one final point to add, John, which may just reinforce it as well, Jonathan, that as part of the Creating ETI, Lucy has created a dedicated team. So at the moment, contract management has to a certain degree been shared across a couple of different roles, but actually as of 2 weeks ago now, I'm leading that group, and so once we've recruited to those positions, we'll have a dedicated resource. So that's in addition to all the people I talk about at the operational level. We'll have a strategic contracts team looking at elements of applying the contract, the robust administration, even to the simple things of checking annual insurances are being maintained, which is the easiest thing to forget to do. So hopefully that gives you some assurance.
Okay, thank you both very much indeed. Jordan.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm just interested in some of the risks associated with the mobilisation, because obviously it's could be quite challenging. I know obviously it could be the existing or it could be a new provider, but it's a new contract, so there will be changes and differences. I'm just wondering how the risks will be mitigated. I'm thinking more, let's say the staff, if they are transferring to a new contract, it could mean a change for them in positions and structure. And obviously it could be a risk in delivering the existing contract, like the highways service. We don't want to see any break, let's say, in activities and a ramp down, as it really will put us behind. So I'm just wondering what we're doing on mobilisation. I'm just wondering with the fleet and equipment and the processes, if it was a new contractor, would that just change overnight? Would the existing one pull all their equipment, fleet out, and they've got to deploy a new one? Because surely, I know precious time will be lost, and also we're losing our momentum. And my second question was just, it says engagement with public was a big consideration. How about engagement with members? Because that kind of falls hand in hand. We can often engage with the local community quite effectively. So I'm just wondering what change we will see, maybe more information flowing to us and stuff like that. Thank you.
Thanks, Jordan. Very good questions.
Thanks, Jordan. I'll answer that, John, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course.
As part of the tenders, all three bidders were asked to provide a mobilisation plan, and there was an evaluation on the mobilisation plan, so it's part of the scoring mechanism, and that included, as you really well described, it's a new way of working, so even an incumbent provider will need to do some things to make changes, and even things like fleet, we're looking very aggressively to move to more sustainable and environmentally friendly fleet and stuff, so regardless of who the provider is. So they've all been evaluated on that and provided fairly robust mobilisation plans. They've all got experience of mobilising big contracts, obviously, in terms of the timings as well, the fact that we've got a 6-month mobilisation period or plus, so that once the outcome is announced in a few weeks' time, we will then start working to get into the finer detail of those mobilisation plans. When we did it last time, when I was in charge last time for my sins, so I've got the experience. The Cabinet Award was at the end of November, and then following the standstill period, we were sort of 14th, I think 15th of December, which didn't really leave much time before people started thinking about taking a break for Christmas. So we didn't really start mobilisation till middle of January, and that wasn't quite enough time. So, as you've described, there's almost two different paths here that we've planned for, and we're ready for both eventualities. But if it's required, we've got the mechanisms to support the staff. So we've got the time and the activities to do that. In terms of maintaining the work and the quality, and it was always a key risk. Again, regardless of whether we're sticking with the same people or moving on, it's about programming our work effectively. We'll be looking at what work comes to an end, because there will be some changes. You talked about fleet. There will be some changes. So once we get into that in October, we'll be working very closely to determine the ins and outs and a much more detailed risk register. So we've got a risk register from all three, but we'll be developing a much more granular level risk register around some of these things. But what it wouldn't be, because there's that lead-in period, if there is a need to change anything, vehicles, plant, whatever, then there is plenty of time to do that.
And Jordan's point about members and the engagement process.
Are you okay to take that?
Do you want me to pick that one up? Yeah. It's a good point out, actually, and it's probably just an error. It's not been excluded explicitly in the document. All of the we've looked very carefully and asked providers to tell us what their engagement strategies look like across all the different types of works, or just in general. So, how we might communicate on reactive or emergency things, from up to the kind of largest planned things and in between, really, to keep people informed. They all have slightly different approaches to that, which is why we've not been so specific in terms of what that really looks like yet. But they vary, and I think I think there's still room to shape that. So if there are views about how members would like that to work for them, then we'd be pleased to hear that, and we can start to feed that in through the mobilisation. What we are also very conscious of is the wider corporate consideration at the moment about engaging with communities and what that looks like as well. So we were trying not to preempt too much of that by setting up something so fixed. But you're absolutely right to point out that members are a key part of that, and rest assured all of the bidders are very aware of that. And it's kind of wrapped up in that whole, we know we want to do some different things around engagement and communication, and that will become more apparent once we start rolling out mobilisation. But it's kind of being shaped in various different ways, so it's not forgotten, it's definitely there.
It might be one, Lucy and colleagues, for the reference group that has been in existence for 2 years, and open invitation to committee members who aren't members of the reference group offline to be part of that process, because I think a dialogue between now and mobilisation on the issues that Jordan's raises would be very useful for all concerned.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Thanks very much, Jordan and Lucy. Catherine.
Hi. Could you just talk a little about in what ways will this new contract support our greener futures ambitions in ways that perhaps that the old contract that we're leaving couldn't do or didn't do?
So I might start. Paul might want to add to this one if that's okay. As I said, this has formed a really strong golden thread for us as well. So, and what we're seeing is a response come back on so many different platforms, if you like. So there's what will be different. I suppose we've got very clear targets about, how are they going to meet the carbon reduction, the net zero commitment that we've got as an authority, and that kind of links back to the need to have a term that kind of incentivizes them to do that, actually. So they've given us various options about how they're going to do that, and they vary across kind of vehicles. So what vehicles are they using? And in some cases on the vehicles, it means what are they starting with from day one and what will they change to over the course of the term. We're also looking at how the depots might operate. So, whether the facilities, and this is in conjunction with our own kind of property colleagues, obviously, but how the depots might operate, whether that's greater recycling opportunities, whether that is making the buildings more, greener in themselves. Certainly in the works planning, we're looking at how we can do less miles. The vehicles could do less miles to fix defects or treat things, and that kind of equally relates to combining more works in one visit. In terms of operational tools, looking at how we can move away from diesel operated tools to solar or other battery pack type things, and we've been trialing some of that now. So but we've tried to get some commitments, and some of these things are easier to do from day one and will need to feed in much later when the technology improves. Similarly, we've some of the options are around different materials, so kind of lower temperature asphalts, for example, in road surfacing, or different types of recycled materials in some of the other construction activities. So I guess what we are doing through driving the targets and their own commitments to reduce the carbon is it's being built in through so many different levels, either through just how they carry out their operations to actually physically what they're doing on the ground. I suppose like us will be subject to kind of travel plans and how they greener travel and all the rest of so it goes very broad, I suppose, is what I'm trying to say. So hopefully that gives you some indication. I don't know if I missed anything, Paul, when you wanted to chip in.
Okay. Thanks, Lucy. Thanks, Paul. Are you okay, Catherine, with the rather good answer, I thought? Thanks, Catherine, very much. Lance.
Okay, so my question's a follow-on really from the earlier question about mobilisation. So mobilisation, I imagine, is to do with the new contractor taking over the contract, which I think is in April next year, which is quite a while away, which gives us plenty of time for that transition. But of course, it also means that the existing supplier, if there is a change of supplier, has no great incentive to deliver against service levels during that transition period. I just wondered what the mechanisms are to encourage the existing supplier to deliver over the crucial winter period.
So I suppose in something like that, Lance, what we're relying on is their organisational integrity and reputation, and to be seen to continuity of service regardless of whether they're changing or not is really important. Today it will be one person, next week with another authority it'll be somebody else, and so maintaining that strong reputation in the market is really important. However, we still have the governance mechanisms, we still have the performance frameworks, we measure the KPIs, and there are tools within that linked to assignment of profit that also have an impact. So where if standards of service drop, then there is literally a direct financial impact. So we do have those tools available to us.
If I could just add to that as well, we've got a very ambitious programme of delivery this year across various activities, active travel, road maintenance and all the rest of it. At a very basic level, the supplier still would want to get that turnover from delivering all of those activities. So I think that the incentive there is, as Paul says, is reputational, but also the fact that they would want to complete that programme of works which they forecast. So if I could just add to that as well.
Thanks, Lucy. And Lance seems happy with that response. Thanks, Lance. So Cameron.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. It's a fairly simple question. I think it was covered briefly by Lucy at the beginning of this meeting, or the beginning of this item, but where you referred to sort of patchwork quilts, if you like. So for me, it's always been less about, the materials are obviously important, but obviously the scale of the defect repair, I think, is something that we've always failed to address. So, for example, where you've got a given area, and we will sort of carry out a number of different repairs, pothole repairs, which in fact then makes the road less safe in some cases. And I can give you some examples of that, where it would be just simpler just to do a patch. But the flexibility that we've had from this current contract, I've always been told, is that we can't do that. And so I suppose if we had the flexibility to at least carry out a larger repair, I'm not saying a complete resurface, but a larger repair, then actually I think that would be more beneficial to that section of road and to sort of our repair and our maintenance program, because actually where you've got where the rest of the road is a fairly decent stretch of road, but you've got one section which we've then made unsafe because we've just carried out a load of different repairs. In fact, actually carrying out a patch would be a lot easier. So I suppose what I'm saying is the flexibility in a new contract to do that, I think would be very welcome. And if I can, Chairman, just quickly, I think this paper was really good. I mean, I certainly like the way that it ties in with our climate change strategy. I like sort of the net zero element in here. So it's just a thanks to the cabinet member and officers for really sort of including that and for really sort of making that point a priority in this. So really pleased to see that.
Good point. I agree with you. But if Paul or Lucy would like to answer or address Cameron's first general point.
Yeah, it looks like I froze. No, I'm back.
No, you're back.
I don't know. Paul might want to come in. I think, if I think about one of the changes we've put in place is we were operating the current contract as a lump sum, if you like, under the defect response. And that might be some of the issue in terms of the rigidity that people might have felt or expressed to members about the ability to do something different. So we've moved away from that in the new approach. We're looking at a much more targeted approach, which gives much more opportunity, hopefully, for more intelligent decisions about what might be appropriate in terms of a repair at that location. For me, so I think there's absolutely a move away from the rigidity. What needs to happen though is we need to still be able to manage that risk, and so we just need to make sure that we'll be able to develop robust enough processes that allows us to do that, as well as do more intelligent repairs, sitting alongside, of course, the investment strategy that helps shift us away completely from having to react to more preventative and planned approach, which is, goes through the heart of this as well, really. So it's hand in hand, but certainly I think the shift away from our current model to the future model gives us a good opportunity to achieve that. And thank you for your other comments there, Cameron. Appreciate that.
I'm sure. Thanks, Lucy. And finally, then we'll go to the suggested recommendations after what has been a very, very useful session. Catherine.
Thank you. It was just a very small point building on what Cameron has just said. Reminded me about pavements, and that patching effect can make on a small scale in pavements can make the pavements really uneven. And it was just sort of, let's not forget about pavements in that intelligent repair thing as well. That's it.
Definitely. Yeah. Totally agree with you there, Catherine. I think all of us do. Okay, first of all, I'd like to join, I'm sure on behalf of us all, our thanks very much to Lucy, Paul, Katie, and Matt and the entire team. It is a very good paper, and I think the quality of the discussion, the questions, the answers have reflected on that. So the sort of suggested recommendations, which Kunwar will magically bring before our eyes, are more kind of not explanatory, but more, reinforcing some of the points, the key points that have been made in discussion. Not to say that the contractor or the council are doing anything wrong, but to kind of focus on the way forward I think on a pretty well consensus basis. But they're the suggested recommendations, colleagues. So give you a minute or so just to remind yourself of them. They've probably been updated slightly during the discussion. So let's just just wait a minute for people to read it, colleagues to read it, and then we'll take any other comments or additions before we conclude this item. I think on a pretty well consensus basis, but they're the suggested recommendations, colleagues. So give you a minute or so just to remind yourself of them. They've probably been updated slightly during the discussion. So let's just wait a minute. I would say, I'm just holding the line in case residents who are watching think we've all disappeared into the ether. I think that's pretty comprehensive.
Looks close to everything we've discussed to me, Chairman.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. I'll work on the assumption, unless the hand suddenly goes up or a voice from the ether shouts at me, that the recommendations that are on the screen are ones that the committee are happy to adopt. We don't all have to shout agreed. So if I shout on your behalf agreed, then that's it. And again, many thanks to the team. It was a very good presentation, an extremely very solid piece of work for a long time. And, on behalf of the reference group, thank you for taking us on the journey with us. That journey is by no means complete, as we were talking about earlier. But so far, so very, very good indeed. Thank you very much indeed. Right. Hello?
I was just saying thank you.
That's all right.
and goodbye. I'll leave you. Thank you very much.
Officer thanks politicians in rare exchange of praise. Thanks, Paul, very much. Okay, now just as important for our residents, buses back better. Can I just say, I think on behalf of all of us, to Laurie and his team, that was another extremely solid, robust, vigorous piece, of which, I don't think we're going to have anybody who's going to disagree with, or indeed quite the opposite. But rather than I starting off on comments. Oh well, hold on. Going to is any Laurie or Katie or Lucy? Is there anything you want to say in brief? As I say, it's an excellent report that you would like just to say now for 2 minutes, and then we'll go straight into questions.
A very brief overview for those listening in the wider world. The new National Bus Strategy was published earlier this year with the snappy strapline of Bus Back Better. It's to encourage more usage of busage as we recover from the pandemic, as we come away from the difficult time we've had for the last few months, with a whole range of proposed improvements to the bus offer. And as an opportunity, of course, to receive government funding as well to enable us to do even more improvements than we've already done in the past few years. All English local authorities have to produce a bus service improvement plan, which is called a BSIP. So if we talk about BSIPs this morning, that's what that is. In the crazy timescales we've been set by government, that is still a work in process, but of course it has to be completed by the 31st of October after Cabinet sign-off. And we very much see that as an ambitious, aspirational, high-level document at that stage, which aligns very smoothly with our new local transport plan, greener futures, and of course our community vision for 2030. We've had many years of successful partnership working with bus operators on an individual basis. We've achieved a lot in that time, improved the offer tremendously. Now is the opportunity to build upon that with some more formal partnership arrangements commencing next April, whereby the various people who sign up to that enhanced partnership, operators, council, other stakeholders, will then need to deliver over a period of time the various improvements contained in the partnerships. So that's where we are at the moment. The big question is we don't know how much money we're going to get until the DFT receive our submission in the autumn, and then there'll be a few weeks delay while they work out how to mark our exam paper and supply us with an allocation of capital and revenue funding.
Laurie, thank you very much. That's a masterful summary. Goodness me, this team is excellent at making good presentations. Now, he didn't put his hand up, but I'm going to call him anyway. Paul Deach, let you start off.
Thank you, Chairman. Now, first of all, I'd just like to echo John's comments about the quality of this paper. It is excellent, I have to say. I was very much expecting, when I started to read out the report, to have my notepad and come into this committee meeting today as a critical friend. as we are supposed to do in scrutiny. But I have to say, I think every single one of the areas that I've repeated over and over again in the various meetings where we talked about buses, you know, you've hit every single sweet spot. And I'm going to repeat those for the benefit of residents that may be watching this, because I think it is important that, and in particular, a resident of who I represent in Mitchett, Maureen from Mitchett. I hope you're watching this or the recording afterwards, because she has made many representations to me over the years about the quality of buses, and I couldn't agree with her more. But the things, if we are going to realistically encourage residents to get out of their cars and onto buses, and I think we are kidding ourselves if we don't touch upon all these 5 points. If we're going to achieve that, and that is that they need to be more reliable. You've talked about that in the report. They need to be more frequent. And really importantly, they need to be cheaper than driving and parking. Okay, they need to run later at night and run at weekends and holidays. And also vitally, they must connect communities. Okay, we don't do those things, we're wasting our time. So one of the things I will be asking for, though, in the recommendation, if I'm going to be critical at all of this report, is that it doesn't really talk enough, to my mind, about the 1 point I made there, cheaper than driving and parking. It touches on it, but I don't think it's strong enough, and that needs to be a lot stronger. But other than that, I think that I'm quite happy with those points. I'd just like to also talk about the real-time passenger information and the ticketing and stuff. That is really, really important. Of course it is. The easier we make bus travel for residents, the more chance they're going to use it. And I think that what I would like to see, because it mentions in there about the development of apps and web technologies and all the rest of it, so that residents can get this real-time information as well as the boards on the bus stops. What I would like to see in the app, because I think more and more people will use an app when this comes about, is real-time current location of the next bus, right? Because with the best will in the world, we can get the bus is more reliable and more on time, but that there are many factors out of the control of the bus operators that, like a traffic jam, for instance, an accident, whatever it may be, that may slow or make that bus late. Now, if a resident who stood at a bus stop expecting a bus to arrive in 3 minutes' time can see actually and then it's going to be late, and can see on the app the real-time location of the next bus, I think that will make lives much more convenient for residents. So the technology does exist for that to happen. So I would like to see that included in any technology going forward. And then I'm going to finish with a question. What happens if we don't get this government funding? Because a lot of what we're talking about rides on getting that funding. What's our plan B? And what can we realistically expect to lose off this plan if we don't get that funding? Thank you very much, and well done to you all. What a great report. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. The submission we're going to be making to the government in the document in the BSIP will include a request for revenue support for all the various measures that we've been talking about, as well as capital support as well for those items that need it, including those service enhancements you mentioned across the network. The core principle of the new national bus strategy is to increase patronage. So I think we very much accept and identify with those fundamental needs, Paul, that you've mentioned there, that residents want to see. We need to carefully consider, however, which areas or measures or initiatives will result in the largest increase in bus patronage, because that is the core message the government's putting out in the new bus strategy. And equally important will be that whatever measures we do implement or consider implementing are sustainable into the future. At some point, this government revenue support, this part of this £3 billion England-wide pot of money, will cease. Some commentators are looking at the life of this parliament, quote unquote. So what we don't want to do is invest in revenue funding for things like service enhancements that we could obviously have problems with in the future should the government funding stream stop. I'm not putting a dampener on our ambitions here, because we are going to be as ambitious in all our proposals in our BSIP as we can, in the knowledge that perhaps we won't get as much money as we would ideally need, but we will certainly get some. At this moment in time, I can't say how much we will get, because we've got no information from DFT or any indication at all. But you're quite correct that if we didn't get sufficient funding, we would have to scale back our ambitions. And I think we're going to be looking at a priority ranking, so to speak. For example, with service improvements, we'd have to establish a priority ranking so that if we didn't get all the funding, we could deploy it where the most value could be obtained in terms of increasing bus patronage. We're looking at having a sort of hierarchy system, if you like, for bus routes: category 1, category 2, category 3. Obviously, category 1 routes are the most important ones, the ones that are key strategic services linking the major towns together and serving the communities in between, and the ones that do already carry the most patronage and provide the firmest platform on which to build. However, there are other equally important services for other communities at a category 2 level, where we also plan or will be writing up a number of enhancements to those services as well. But most patronage increase will occur on the key networks, and that's where we will focus a lot of our other investment as well, such as bus priority measures on the key corridors, at the pinch points. All the bus operators have been very helpful in coming forward with all their favourite pinch points on our network and the impact it has on their services. A key requirement of whatever we do is to improve reliability of bus services. People are more wound up about reliability of buses, will it come when the timetable says, than they actually are about level of service or fare. That's not to diminish the importance of those things, but reliability is the key, and that needs to be targeted at the bus routes where it will most benefit. In terms of electronic data information on bus services, we've had our real-time information system for some time. We would like to see an expansion of on-street presence of that at selected locations, you know, the signs on the bus shelters and so on. In terms of having our own app or website, we did in fact have a website for a period of time a few years ago called Travel Smart. But the results in terms of upturn usage of that were not as clear as one might have thought. But the idea of a Surrey-wide bus transport platform can be considered, but the cost of that needs to be weighed against what information is already available from open data sources. The government has a new system in place now called BODS, Bus Operational Data System, which collects electronic data from operators on their schedules, fares and vehicle positioning, and makes that data available to open platform suppliers. In other words, commercial suppliers who provide the sort of websites and apps that you would look at on your mobile phone. And if you're going to look at something for a bus, I think a lot of people go to something like Google to start with, as a first port of call, and that's where that data can be used by these suppliers to create such systems. So we must be careful that we don't duplicate what is already available out there and is improving regularly now through the government BODS initiative, which has now been in place for a year or so and is growing every day.
Okay. If I can just quickly come back, John.
Yeah, just quickly. We've got 5 others.
Yeah, the uptake on the website that you mentioned. I mean, I remember that website. I'm willing to bet good money that if we achieve our aim of getting people out their cars and onto buses, that the uptake would be significantly higher. I take your point on the real-time passenger information. Thanks for that. But all I would say is I'd like to see in the report an emphasis on, beg your pardon, on the recommendation, an emphasis on the cheaper than driving and parking. That we really do need to bolster that in the recommendation. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Laurie. Okay, so we've got Andy, Catherine, Jordan, Jonathan and Stephen. So Andy first.
Thanks, John. I mean, most of the points have already been made by Paul and Laurie. That I'd just like to comment that the bus service in London is just amazing, actually. I used to work in London, and I quickly learned that it's much easier and better to use the bus service than the underground service, because they are reliable, they're frequent, and they've got all these signs telling you when they're coming along. And somehow we need to try and replicate that, although it's obviously difficult in an area like Surrey. In terms of local experience in Farnham, actually, I thought I've got I use a garage in Aldershot. It's probably about 4 miles from where I live. And if you book it early enough, you can actually get a courtesy car, or they'll even come and pick the car up for you. But I thought I'd try doing it by public transport yesterday, as it happened, just to see how that went. And it took me about an hour, actually. I had to walk about 20 minutes into the centre of Farnham. Then the bus to Aldershot, to the centre of Aldershot, took about 20 minutes. And then another 20 minutes to walk to the actual garage. I could probably have walked from home, and maybe I should have done without going by. I've got better exercise and that sort of thing. It's just inconvenient. The actual services in Farnham are quite reliable in that they do turn up at the appropriate times and that sort of thing, but they're just infrequent and also not that convenient and costly. I mean, for people who have to rely on buses, the council for North Farnham is always telling us things like, that's the poorer part of Farnham. There isn't a GP surgery in North Farnham at all. So people have to come to this Farnham hospital. And it's very expensive to take a small family from North Farnham just to get to visit the GP. And there aren't ticketing systems like family tickets and that sort of thing that you get in the railways. So I think the bus companies need to be thinking about doing things like that. Family tickets and tickets for regular users and stuff like that. There needs to be more imaginative fare type stuff, I mean, what we really need in Farnham is small electric buses buzzing around the town that are frequent and reliable. And we don't need these rather big stagecoach buses, which is what we've currently got. We need small, reliable electric buses just buzzing around that are convenient for everybody. I know it's going to be difficult to achieve that, but that's actually what's needed. Right, thanks very much, John.
Thanks, Andy. Laurie, any comments on a number of points Andy raised?
If I had a fraction of the funding that TfL has in London to provide the sort of service that applies there, I'd be absolutely delighted. But of course I don't, and nor will I either after the allocation of funding from Bus Back Better pot of money. However, I would agree entirely with what you're saying in terms of what would make a bus more attractive to local residents in Farnham and many other places. The difficulty of what I call the first and last mile of your journey is always a challenge. Walking from where you live to a bus stop and then walking from the bus station in Aldershot at the other end to wherever you happen to be going. There's always going to be an element of that, and you have to balance between running the buses on the main road routes as opposed to penetrating residential areas, which some people will consider to be very useful to get buses nearer to your home, but other residents may not be quite so keen. So we have to balance, or the bus companies have to balance, what sort of route network they have. In terms of the size of buses, there's the thought of having small ones, for example, at quiet times of day and bigger ones at busy times of day doesn't stack up in terms of bus operating economics. Those larger buses will be quite well loaded when they're doing the school and college trips at 8:30 in the morning and 3:30, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And it's not economically sustainable to put them away at 9 o'clock and bring out a smaller bus. If you can carry the load at any time of day with one size fits all, so to speak, that's why you see the larger buses when perhaps you think they should be, taken off and replaced by something smaller. As for electric buses, of course, we do already have significant plans and funding in our capital pipeline already earmarked to support operators decarbonise their fleets. This is a somewhat iterative process, and it's an area where technology is evolving almost every day at the moment in terms of improvements in electric buses and hydrogen fuel cell buses and also minibuses as well. We have allocated, or we are to allocate in our capital pipeline about £32.3 million for conventional buses and 6.5 million towards community transport vehicles. And there's already progress in this direction. We've got 9 electric buses on the park and ride services in Guildford, have had for about a year or more now. We are working with a major operator on the A23 corridor who has already placed their own order for 20 hydrogen fuel cell electric buses for use in the Crawley and Hawley areas, and we want to increase that number by another 30 to 35 odd vehicles. We would also, I'm sure in the fullness of time, be engaging with the likes of, for example, Stagecoach over in the west of Surrey to do something similar, because we all recognise the air quality issues in some of our town centres, Farnham included, of course. And that's all part and parcel of the Farnham improvement programme, of course, that's going down hand in hand at the moment.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks, Laurie. Thanks, Andy. Right, Catherine.
Thank you. So I'm very excited about all the bus planning. Could you just give us an idea of what percentage increase in bus patronage would you anticipate if you got all the funding that you're going to apply for? Just to give us an idea of what sort of percentage change we're hoping for.
Tricky one to answer because we're not in a normal place at the present time. Before the pandemic, there were about 29 million bus passenger journeys made in Surrey. That's one-way trips by people. During the pandemic, of course, usage plummeted for obvious reasons. We had a lockdown with all the concerns over travelling on public transport by members of the public, to be expected. We are now on average back to around about the sort of 60% mark of pre-pandemic patronage, but that fluctuates quite wildly from one bus route to another. It's not uniform across the whole portfolio. Operators are saying to us that to allow them to come to the funding party to contribute to some of the measures that they have partly in their gift, as well as the stuff that's in our gift, they need to be looking at about 80% of previous patronage as a starting point to start thinking about releasing capital investment once more, which has been paused. So at the moment, it's the schools are back and patronage is hopefully building. It'll be the next few weeks that are a telling time for operators to take a view and to help inform us on what we should realistically set as a patronage uplift target. I can't quote you a figure at the moment. It's very hard to be precise about that in terms of the uncertainty that's currently surrounding patronage recovery. We hope that we'll go through the winter with no change to the current abilities of people to travel, and the roadmap won't be reversed from where it is at the moment. If it was, that would obviously have quite a serious impact. But what the bus strategy is seeking from government is absolutely the right thing to do, but in our view, it is completely the wrong time to do it because of the abnormal conditions. But of course, government is very keen on trying to show that it is supporting the bus industry in the UK and helping people to make choices as part of the decarbonisation wishes that are currently in place.
Thank you. Can I just ask one supplementary question? It's for my own understanding. It struck me we're talking about the council applying for government money. Some of the buses are owned by the bus companies, but we're also looking to electrify the fleets. And it's just, does the money that we apply for, does it go into a separate body which is called the Enhanced Partnership, or does it go into the council? Do you see what I mean? It's just, who owns the buses? Is it a joint ownership or?
The money comes to the council. Any money we get from the bus service improvement plan will come to the local authority to disperse under normal internal processes and approvals. In terms of the buses, there are various ways that you can deal with that. We could own them. And that's one option. We've owned a fleet of buses about 10 years ago for a school bus network that we had. And the operators use them, of course, with a very rigid and well-written legal agreement. But they're using them, of course, only for the intended purposes of the council on the specific routes, and they have maintenance obligations, of course, to make sure that they're maintained as fit for purpose. There's also ways whereby ownership could transfer from the council to an operator over a period of time. But there are various complex mechanisms in place. These electric or hydrogen fuel cell buses, if we invest or help operators invest in those, they are cutting edge technology, and some of the costs attached to them ongoing are significantly more than the average diesel bus. But when we talk about decarbonisation, it's not only electric and hydrogen buses where that applies. We have a number of older buses in Surrey on diesel fuel. All the buses have sort of diesel engine emission ratings called Euro something, Euro 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Some of our operators have still got these Euro 4 and 5 buses. Now, the uplift in emission reduction between Euro 4, Euro 5 and Euro 6 is substantial. They might be diesel, but they are so much more green than the older models. And some operators are not yet in a position to embrace the electric or hydrogen fuel cell technology and all the charging infrastructure that goes with it. We have some very good SME bus companies running in Surrey who would love to do that in principle, but are not quite ready yet. But they say, give us some support to help upgrade our fleet of diesel buses or retrofit the older ones so that they comply to the new emissions. It may not be the most high profile part of a decarbonisation plan, but it's certainly quite an important contributor.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Laurie, for a good answer, detailed answer to Catherine's question. Jordan.
Give us some support to help upgrade our fleet.
Thank you, Chairman. I just had a few questions about with the enhanced partnerships. I mean, there's a lot of bus companies operating in Surrey, some small, some national. I'm just wondering, obviously that could be a blessing or could be something that'll actually hinder us because we've got to work with companies who are big and large and others who are small and probably don't have the resources to be able to commit to this. I'm just wondering how we can work together and standardise bus operations across Surrey with this in mind. And also we need to make sure we have cross-boundary cooperation. I'm thinking with West Sussex, in my area, a lot of the buses do run in and out of West Sussex. It's actually where they're based. So I'm just wondering how we can achieve that. Because obviously the A23 corridor has been mentioned, and that is quite a good example of where it runs cross-border into Gatwick and into Crawley. And it'd be good to see some perhaps bus prioritisation measures, as that will really drive bus usage there, because the traffic is appalling between Hawley going into Red Hill and further beyond. And I was also just wondering, the existing bus routes, do we actually look at them quite often? Because I'm thinking of one example in my division, there's a bus and it runs 3 times a week, and it's a 2-hourly service, and the usage is very poor on that. And I just think if we redesign that, we could go for demand responsive transport. I actually have a lot of residents contact me saying, can we not just have a demand responsive bus which takes me to Tesco's, let's say, to the other side of town? And that could actually be a cost effective way of redesigning the bus service, a bit like an Uber bus, which I know is being trialled elsewhere.
Okay, there's a number of points there raised by Jordan. Laurie?
Yes, we do indeed have a portfolio of different sized bus companies. There's about 20 or so that operate in the county. Some of them are actually based within Surrey's borders, and some come in from the Sussexes and from Greater London even, where they're based, but in close proximity to our border. We find that it's very helpful to have this mix of operators. We've got representatives of the major PLCs, the national PLCs, but we've also got some really good small and medium enterprise companies, family owned. And some of those are just as ambitious in terms of what they would like to see from this bus service improvement plan as indeed are the major companies. And it's good to see that they are, to a man, all supportive of what we all jointly need to do in terms of improving the bus offer in the county. Cross-border considerations, yes, we've obviously had liaison with all our surrounding local authorities. And we've also had liaison with the major airports. You know, Heathrow and Gatwick are very important in terms of public transport access for airport staff and for passengers as well. Something like the A23 corridor is by its nature a cross-border situation, whereby Crawley joins on to Gatwick and Hawley and up to Red Hill. So it has to be a continuous thinking, if you like, between the various parts of the corridor. And the same applies on other corridors, especially over in the Blackwater Valley, where the Surrey-Hampshire boundary straddles several important bus routes. Talking of Uber buses and demand responsive transport, very much we have proposals coming as part of the bus service improvement plan for expansion of some of our DRT, demand responsive transport operations. We're already working on a Mole Valley enhanced demand responsive transport project through the Rural Mobility Fund money, which government has already awarded us. And I see DRT as being something better placed for the more rural areas, where, as you said earlier, maybe 3 buses a day in the country areas might be better served by a more tailored or bespoke on-demand service, which can be pre-booked through a telephone or an app, for example. So DRT has its place, but it's not something, in my view, which is able to be rolled out in every place in the county.
Thank you. Thank you, Jordan. I ought to just say, colleagues, I'm looking at the time, 12:15, but my sense is there's still enough energy and vigour in the room on this item that we will continue until it starts flagging. We've still got one more item, quite important item to do. But if I sense we're kind of flagging, then I might just suggest we not curtail questions, but be a little briefer. But at the moment, I don't sense that. And all the contributions so far have been from members, and the answers have been excellent. So we'll keep on as is for the moment, at least. Jonathan, continue.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, on page 81 of the report, paragraph 28, you talk about enhancements for bus shelters, and you say that the provision for those enhancements is still being considered. I just wonder if you could give some insight into what those enhancements might look like, and also the funding around those enhancements. Are you looking at funding, and where is it intended to come from as well? Thank you.
Yes, we've been working on enhanced passenger waiting environments for many years now, and a lot has already been achieved in terms of better waiting areas, new bus stop infrastructure, poles, signs, timetable cases and so on, and also accessibility improvements around the actual bus stops. A lot of that has been funded through various pots of developer funding money, which have contributed nicely to corridor upgrades of bus infrastructure. Up until now, bus shelters have traditionally been a borough and district, or borough or district responsibility. The county council does own a small number of shelters that it's paid for primarily with things like developer funding, but the main bus shelter contracts are held with suppliers of such shelters by the borough and district councils, and that is an area which we want to investigate more fully to see if we can obtain better synergy and integration of shelter provision in the future. The county council does own a small number.
Thank you. Jonathan, do you have a supplementary?
Thank you for that. Just in terms, thank you, Chair, just in terms of passengers and passenger experience, you talk about a passenger charter that you're looking to develop. I think it's page 81, paragraph 29. Can you just give us some insight into what that charter is intended to look like and the engagement exercise that will be so much part of developing that charter, the engagement with our communities, of course. Thank you.
Yeah, some bus operators already have their own passenger charter. What they basically set out is what a passenger can reasonably expect from that particular bus operator, and what the bus operator, if you like, should be able to expect from a passenger. It also gives details of routes for recourse if a complaint should occur, and how to go about getting that recourse. And that's what we will develop as part of hopefully a sort of generic passenger charter, if you like, which lets bus users know what they can reasonably expect. That will be developed as part of the sort of stage 2 process, if you like, after the bus service improvement plan has been sent off to the DFT. We will then move into detailed planning for what goes into the actual enhanced partnership. So it's a 2-stage approach. And I think in terms of engaging with people as to feedback to help inform preparing such a charter, there's a lot of good guidance out there from Passenger Focus, who are a national organisation on behalf of bus users and transport users in general, not just buses, sorry. And also we have organisations like Bus Users UK, who are no doubt going to be producing copious guidance to local authorities on what a passenger charter should look like. In fact, I think there's a webinar coming up from Passenger Focus very shortly on exactly that subject. And we also have, in one part of Surrey, a very useful and strong bus users group. And I think this leads us into governance, doesn't it, of the whole enhanced partnership process. We were going to have a governance board, but we'll also have a stakeholder reference group. And I think it'll be open invitation to whomever would like to be involved in a stakeholder reference group. We'd love to see bus user representation groups across the county. But obviously you can only have them if you've got people in the community willing to get involved and take on the mantle of organising such a thing. As I said, there's a strong one in one part of the county, but it would be very helpful as time goes on to encourage such groups in other areas as well. How you do that is a bit of a challenge, of course, but if we can't get something like that set up in the other areas of the county, then maybe we could draw upon the assistance of the local members in those areas who have great communications channels already in existence with local residents, and through local members not only could sort of information be disseminated, but also sought, so to speak, from people in the community who might be willing to get on board such a group. And of course the invitation will be there for councillors, for members to become involved in a stakeholder reference group as well. So we're trying to make it as inclusive as possible. Matt Furness has already written to the Surrey disability groups and boroughs and districts, informing them of what's going on, and seeking their support and engagement. By involving people like the Surrey Coalition as an example, that's great for when you're producing a passenger charter, making sure you consider the needs of all the various groups in the community.
Okay, thank you. That's a necessary longer answer, but justified nonetheless. Thanks, Jonathan. Stephen.
Seeking their support and engagement.
Thank you, Chairman. Two very different questions, but I think they'll both they'll both revolve fairly straightforward and quick answers. First one, I've always been concerned that the multiplicity of contracts involved in the bus service must have real disadvantages. And I know I discussed with senior officers some years ago whether, in fact, it would be more sensible to bring the whole service in-house. And their answer was yes, it would be, but that's prevented by the deregulation legislation. And I just wondered whether that was still the case, and we couldn't consider that because of national legislation. Second one, very different, and that's school transport. And I've been very surprised in a way that there's no mention at all of school buses in any of the literature that I've seen. Now, it seems to me that if we're ever going to solve the congestion problem and all of the issues that raises, with the school run particularly, we're never going to do that by walking and cycling. There needs to be a significant improvement in the provision of school transport. Now, why was that not included in the report?
Okay, I'll take the school bus issue first. Students attend schools and colleges on two sort of main forms of bus transport. Many of them use the public bus network, the self-same one that everybody else does, services that run throughout the day and happen to serve schools. There's also a number of public bus routes which are tailored more specifically to individual schools. So any improvements in frequency, reliability and passenger experience on those routes will by default benefit school students travelling in the morning and the afternoon. The other raft of school transport is the closed door bespoke transport that our Children, Families and Lifelong Learning Division supply by means of coaches, taxis for mainstream children, and also all the transport for these SEND children. Now, those that sector of the bus market, so to speak, is not specifically included by the government in the new National Bus Strategy. But certainly, as I said, the main bus network, the kids will benefit from whatever improvements can be put in place. We, in fact, did about 15 years ago have a school bus project of our own to take cars off the road. There was no statutory obligation to provide it, Stephen. You may remember it was called Pegasus, and it served a number of schools in Guildford and in parts of Mole Valley, I think, from memory as well. 20 buses, cheap fare, very cheap fare, lovely buses. Everybody thought it was fantastic. The loadings were good. The problem was it cost $900,000 a year in revenue funding to provide it. So providing the sort of school bus provision one would ideally like to try and encourage even more cars off the road is a very cash-hungry occupation. Moving back to size of contracts, how many contracts we have, that is, I believe that is right and proper. It allows you not to put all your eggs in one basket. I don't see any evidence that having all the routes run by one or fewer numbers of operators actually would provide a saving. Most local authorities feel that having as many potential players on your contract invite select list as possible is actually the best way of achieving best value. We did have a study done by a consultant some considerable years ago on should the county council have its own bus company. The answer was a resounding no, and the costs would have been higher, not to mention recruiting the necessary expertise to run it, because that's not us, that's obviously specialist expertise in running buses. You're right that in national legislation there are restrictions about a non-mayoral authority, I believe it is, to run their own buses. There used to be dozens of municipal bus companies in Britain, and now there's only about 1 dozen. Because many of them have been privatised or sold off to the management since 1986. So again, I don't think there's much evidence there that major savings will be made.
Okay. Straight question, straight answer. Stephen, you're muted. Come on, Stephen, you've got to unmute your microphone if you want to speak. He's smiling.
Sorry, Chairman. I was saying I could ask more questions about both of those, but I'm conscious of the time.
You've been very good today. Probably the best member in terms of conciseness of questions and acuity of questions too. Thanks, Stephen. Lance. Stephen, you're muted. Come on, Stephen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So my question's around marketing of the services, the bus services, and the community engagement and communication. Is it the responsibility of the operators to effectively drive consumption of these services, or does the council have a role to play in that? I guess it links back to your stakeholder reference groups. It's, if we want more people to use these services, we've got to make them more attractive. I understand all the technical pieces of that. But there is also a marketing exercise in terms of making it look more attractive. And I wonder what you thought the council's role was in that, and whether any funding is going to be put into the plan to enable the council to support that type of marketing activity.
Yes, I would very much agree with your sentiments there. I think we're very good at providing information. If you look at the bus pages on our website, you'll find all the brand new up-to-date timetables and lots of other information. But I don't think as a local authority we're much better than many other local authorities in terms of marketing and promotion, because traditionally we've not been placed or resourced to do that. But I think that's something that in the future we should look to expand upon and include in our bid for funding to support such additional marketing measures. I think we could work hopefully in conjunction with our colleagues in communications team to put this message about buses out more strongly perhaps than we have in the past, especially now we're trying to encourage people back onto buses after the pandemic. And that
I mean, just thanks, Lauren. I know Lucy wants to come in, but just to Kunwar, maybe Lance would agree that when we're thinking of recommendations, that element of much better communications to our residents about the bus service might be one of those that we add on to our list of recommendations. Sorry to interrupt the flow, but Lucy, you want to come in?
Yeah, no, I'm just going to build on. I was just going to build on that and say, absolutely. I think what struck a chord with me there was perhaps the potential for once we've finished consulting on our Surrey transport plan, obviously the next stage of that moves into the deliverability plan, and I suppose there'll be a whole host of areas of communication or marketing that we will need to cover across the behavioural change piece, just as well as just simple messaging about what services are available. So I think it wraps quite nicely into some of the other activities we do, but you're right to point it out, we need to make sure we've captured that somehow, perhaps more as inclusively as we possibly can.
Indeed.
Thanks.
Well done. Thanks. And Katie, come in. Yeah, please.
Just to be definitive, yes, we will pick that up as part of the wider Greater Futures behaviour change piece. So we're obviously doing a lot in terms of communicating with the residents in terms of what they can do to change behaviour. So this fits very, very nicely into that. So absolutely, we will pick that up.
Thanks, Katie. Thanks, Lucy. And thanks very much, Lance, for raising that really very important point. Colin, been very patient.
Hi, thank you. Thank you, John. Yeah, just a couple of points, Laurie. I'm very interested in what studies may have been carried out on the ticket pricing strategies of the companies, the bus companies, and also about the loading of the or the lack of loading of buses that I see. First of all, on the pricing, if you go from Ripley to Guildford, that's about 8 miles, and the cost of that ticket at the moment is somewhere between £6 and £7 one way, which comes out pretty extraordinarily high. If you go to Europe, you'll find you can do those sort of rides for about between £1 and £2. So we're way out of kilter. And I wondered, are there any studies going on which would produce a strategy around special deals, bulk buying, or deals for the under 18s, deals for the over 60s? You know, we need to get the pricing down in some way because we just don't get the loading that you need, and I think it's a vicious circle. And secondly, I noticed casually that the buses that come through here have between 3 and 4 people on average, and they're very big buses, very big vehicles, and it seems to me that we need to look again at what sort of vehicles we use for these shorter journeys around villages into the towns. Again, if you go abroad, you'll find the shorter the journey, the smaller the bus. They have big coaches in Spain going from city to city, but between the villages and the towns and the cities, they have much, much smaller vehicles, and they get a higher loading, and it must be much cheaper to run them. So perhaps a couple of thoughts there, Laurie.
Yeah, I'll start with the last one first again. I think we've talked about bus size already this morning. There is very little difference in cost in running a small bus and a big bus. The main element of cost of running buses is driver wages, and if you start having wage segmentation for the size of the bus, that creates all sorts of problems. Going on now to ticket pricing, this is a conundrum that everybody's been wrestling with for years and is still doing so now. Bus fares, quote unquote, are too dear. In Europe, yes, they are cheaper, but so is the amount of regional, national and other subsidy that's put into public transport in comparative terms to what happens in the UK. The cost to the user for the British bus and train network must be one of the highest proportions in Europe. You can have cheaper prices, but somebody's got to pay the subsidy for it. Now, we're working through at the moment what we can do in terms of the requirement in the strategy for simpler and allegedly cheaper fares. But that needs to be agreed and thrashed out with operators in the partnerships as to what they could actually deliver, and if the fares were cheaper, how much subsidy they would require. But where we are looking at specifically at the moment is some better fare deals. You mentioned young people. We currently have a student fare card for the 16 to 19s. If they're in full-time education, they can get fare travel. We're looking as a measure in our bus service plan to widen that to an under 20s scheme, irrespective of whether you're in full-time education or not. And what that young person would do would be to buy a pass from the county council, like they do the fare cards for the students at the moment, and then they would get discounted travel across the Surrey bus network. So, if you like, an expansion of the arrangements already in place.
That's very good. Thank you.
Thanks, Colin. And Laurie, I will come back to this slightly in my own contribution in a few seconds, but who hasn't spoken yet? And Mark's next on the list. Yeah, Mark Sugden.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Laurie, just a quick question. As part of this bus service improvement plan, and this is just a clarification, there's no intent, is there, to change operators in certain parts of Surrey? And the reason I say that is that in about 70% of my division, which is Hinchley Wood, Claygate and Oxshott, Hinchley Wood and Claygate are served by TfL.
That's quite an interesting consideration for us at the moment, because Transport for London, without wishing to be disrespectful, is a law unto itself. We have 24 TfL services that come across the Surrey border, and Hinchley Wood is indeed one of those communities that is served virtually entirely by TfL bus services. TfL is not a required player in the new national bus strategy, because the arrangements for TfL are totally different to the rest of England. But no, I wouldn't envisage a change in the way that services are provided on those cross-border London services. I believe that they're already, in my view, very good compared to what occurs in some other parts of the county in terms of frequency, span of operation, and of course fares and the availability of the Oyster card. What we need to do, I think, is try and build up the rest of the bus offer in the county to try and come closer to the TfL style of arrangement. That's what the government was thinking when they wrote the bus strategy. They envisaged every town and city in the UK being similar to the current scenario in London. But of course, that comes at a huge cost. So we have to be realistic about what we can actually achieve with the funding we're going to get.
Thank you very much for that, and I'm pleased to hear that answer.
Thanks, Mark. Laurie, just to conclude, I think nobody else, other colleague wants to speak. Just a couple of points I'd raise, two of which, one of which is to reiterate what Paul and Colin was saying about pricing. I mean, the strategy itself, the government paper, is quite clear that one of its priorities is reduction in bus fares, and it goes, the little statistic that I saw in that, in terms of price rises since 1987, bus fares have increased by 405%, train fares by 325%, and the car user just by a mere 163%. So, the last 30 years or so, the competitiveness, the attractiveness of buses, and you compound that with the amount of travellers who, in that same period, who no longer use buses outside London. That's really very worrying and disconcerting picture to make. So appreciate everything you've just said in answer to Colin and to Paul about the need for subsidy. That those issues have to be worked out. Absolutely accept that, but as far as the prioritisation of what the council can do, I would, perhaps without necessarily, making policy on the hoof, as it were, that maybe greater consideration in that mix as we go forward, not on every route, but maybe on certain routes, the consideration by Cabinet, given that this what we're talking about now is a recommendation to Cabinet in a few weeks' time, that the element of pricing within that overall framework might be more obvious or more apparent than it is at the moment in the paper. That's just an observation. My second question, and it's been kind of touched on, it's separate. Are the structures of governance as we go into enhanced partnership? the governance board, as established, I think, on paragraph 35, but also, and you've made a reference to it a number of times, to the stakeholder group. Well, in the paper itself, it says we intend to establish the stakeholder group in the autumn. Well, we are in the autumn. And so, that's not a criticism, but it is a recognition that of all the parties that you yourself mentioned, district councils, residents groups, bus user groups, county councillors, district and borough councillors, bringing them all together into a coherent and useful sounding board for the enhanced partnership, to ensure that the credibility of the enhanced partnership is there in April 2022. That's quite a tough timescale. And so my question is, is this practical to get these new institutions established, literally in a matter of maybe weeks or so, in order to take this, this excellent policy forward as robustly and as rigorously as we would like?
Yes, like everything connected with this project, it's the shortness of time that the government's given us to do it. It'll be far more useful when we do actually know how much funding we're going to get, but that's a process that's not going to be instantaneous. So inevitably, some of the development of the project prior to the enhanced partnerships will have to take place later than we would ideally like. But I think by the time we finished all our invitations to potential joiners to the stakeholder reference group, it will take a little while to assemble, certainly. This is all new to everybody, of course, so we're finding our way as we go at the moment. But yes, it would be helpful to have those groups in place as soon as practically possible, so that we're best informed and best able to share everything that's going on ready for April next year. The only other piece of the governance we haven't mentioned is a delivery group. We're having a governance board, as mentioned in the paper, and so that would sit alongside that would sit the stakeholder reference group, and then below those there would be a delivery group, which are the nuts and bolts matters to consider, made up of Surrey officers and probably key bus operator representatives as well, and inviting people from other outside body groups as required to deal with specific issues like boroughs and districts on parking enforcement, for example, or dare I even mention it, off-street car parking charge adjustments. I won't go any further on that at the moment. Right?
Okay. Yeah. Thanks for ending on a non-contentious note. Okay. Thanks to Lauren and for excellent exposition. We will now move to, if Kunwa, there he is, again, listening into the conversation, adding on. I should emphasise to say this is a document, this is a formal recommendation from the committee to Cabinet. The overriding principle is that we're very, very happy with the tone, the tenor, the ambition of the strategy paper. So the recommendation should be seen in that light as, if you like, commendations, recommendations, advice, counsel to Cabinet, to Laurie, the team, Matt and Katie. So and I'm sure they've been revised from the during the discussion. So as in our usual case, if we can bring it back, if we could have just a minute or so for colleagues to look through it, and we'll take amendments or additions to that. I see Colin's got his hand up. That's absolutely fine. Just wait just 30 seconds or so, and we'll then have a quick discussion on it. Colin's taking his hand down. During the discussion, so as in our usual case, but Catherine has raised her hand. So Catherine, over to you.
Just point 5. I think we're trying to make all the Surrey buses run on maybe non-fossil fuel, because obviously some are hydrogen, and I know we've got some are cleaner diesel, obviously, but yeah, whatever the phrase is for sustainable fuels.
Kunwar is using his considerable, formidable textual ability to do this as we speak. Thank you. Okay, well, so just give one minute, just a few more seconds, and then I'll work on the basis we've done in the past, that if there are no comments or hands up, we will take those recommendations as agreed. And I see no hands, so thank you very much indeed. Again, I appreciate very much to Laurie and the team. It's an excellent piece of work. I hope our deliberations will have contributed and added value to the team as they take this forward to Cabinet. And of course, in the months, the committee will take an active interest in the progress of what we hope will be a very successful enhanced partnership, leading to many more of our residents using our bus service. So, but thank you guys very much indeed. Now, colleagues, we are now 12:45. We've got one more item on the speed cameras. We can, with Duncan, we can either go straight on. I still sense there's quite a bit of enthusiasm, or we can take a 10-minute break and then reassemble. I will suggest that we continue unless anybody says, no, I want a 10-minute break. Nobody has said we'll have a 10-minute break. We're gone. No. And there's Stacey saying emphatically, no, we want to go on. So we will go on. Duncan, thank you very much, and Matt and team. Thank you again for a very interesting, good, well-argued paper. The matter of great concern to many of our residents. Love a speed camera was average on that. And Duncan, you're blowing up again. Hissing noise, maybe it's your pet snake or something. It's off. So as before, if you want to, we've all read the paper in detail. But if you'd like to, or Matt, but Duncan first, if there's anything you want to sort of add to sort of facilitate the discussion, the floor is yours. Not your day today, Duncan.
So, Chairman, while Duncan attempts to reboot again, basically what we've been doing is we've been working closely with Surrey Police on updating our speed enforcement policy. Primarily, the existing policy prior to this update was just looking at casualties. However, particularly with the introduction of average speed cameras, of which we have about 10 in Surrey, which is more than most in the southeast. Sorry, Duncan.
Not your day. Continue, Matt.
So with the average speed cameras, we've actually, with the data that's been given, it's been shown that average speed cameras also do help with not only tackling congestion, but also air quality as well, improving traffic flows and air quality. There's also, because it was just purely looking at incident data, it didn't take into account sort of concerns about speeding that local communities were raising as well. So if you look at the document, it's actually incorporating those three elements primarily all the way through. And I think actually comes out with a much better policy, which actually can respond better to resident concerns, particularly around speeding in their areas. It also means that actually it will be slightly easier to put in average speed cameras and other points, which will allow the police to use their mobile vans and their other resources in the local communities much more effectively. It's not a massive area of the police with their resources, so having that extra ability to respond onto local demands will be very good. So I think we're keen on just getting some thoughts from the committee. This has all been agreed with Surrey Police, so they're very happy with the proposals that we're changing, but it will of course be all monitored through the Drive Smart board, which I sit on, Duncan, the Police and Crime Commissioner and Chief Constable as well. So I'm going to say, Duncan, I think we can hear and see you now, so we'll go with that. But that's a summary, and I'll allow Duncan to emphasise any details.
Thanks, Matt. Stood in masterful stand-in, if I may say. Duncan, is there anything you'd like to add to what the portfolio holder, start again, that Matt has just said?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what Matt said. I've only just joined back in, but probably I just want to, if not said already, is I think this policy is a real an improvement in that it, for the first time, offers the opportunity to introduce speed cameras at more community concern sites where perhaps there hasn't just been a history of collisions, but it's to try and address those locations where there is concern in the community about the impact of speed, where it's having an impact on the confidence to walk and cycle, air quality and congestion. So this is a really good thing, I think.
Okay. Thanks, Duncan. It's good to have you all wired up for sound, literally. Thanks so much. Paul.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Matt and Duncan as well. I was pleasantly surprised to read this report. There was a lot of good stuff in there. I think Matt knows, certainly in my county division, that speeding, at least in one of the villages, I represent 3 villages, Mitchett, Deepcut and Frimley Green, but certainly in Mitchett, I would say that speeding related issues or antisocial behaviour involving vehicles accounts for a very large part of my inbox communication from residents and the chatter on social media. As far as average speed cameras are concerned, love all the stuff on that. I honestly don't think or it is designed to be that we're going to get average speed cameras in the villages. I recognise that just wouldn't be viable from a financial point of view, because, you know, obviously you've got to have a high volume of traffic going through for them to be viable. But I was very pleased to see the stuff on the spot camera stuff. But I do have a concern, and I've written this down, so I'm going to read it out because it's that important. I don't want to cock it up. So I have a concern about the implementation of spot cameras only when highway engineering improvements are considered first. Often highways engineering improvements cost vast sums of money, much more than a camera might cost or what I have available in my members' highways allocation. And often the budgets just don't exist to solve the problem through engineering. I see this as being an infinite loop situation where nothing gets done about a problem. So yes, the policy about the introduction of spot cameras is good, but I think that we might be faced with a situation where we're just not going to get anything achieved because of that one element there, and I would like that addressing, please.
Yeah, certainly. The police have been we've been negotiating with the police on this policy for a few weeks, and their concern would be a proliferation of lots of cameras all over the place. And if they were to be introduced where there are other measures that could solve it, then they are going to be inundated with lots more work and lots more penalties. And it's not quite right what you said, that, you know, we only put them in locations where we can think we can make some money and pay for it. Actually, we don't want the penalties. We're inundated with the penalties. We can't cope. Sorry, then, if I misunderstood, but the concern is we didn't, having too many cameras at too many locations is not something that the police would support, because they would not be able to cope with the volume of offences, but also they would perhaps there's the danger of losing public support for cameras as well, where they should be used as a road safety tool at the locations that really need them. Therefore, if it's a low traffic residential road where traffic calming is eminently viable, the police would say no to a camera, because otherwise they have an enduring task of issuing penalties and prosecutions to drivers, including court prosecutions, which the money for which doesn't come back to pay for the camera partnership, and it clogs up the courts and so on and so forth. And that's not a good use of public resources to try and tackle this problem, compared to a one-off, perhaps more expensive, but a one-off investment in traffic calming. Instead, there are locations around the county, perhaps on, say, the A25, where in some villages traffic calming just wouldn't be viable. You know, it's a major road, it's a diversion route for the M25. and you wouldn't be looking to put traffic calming where there are all those HGVs going past close by to residential properties. Those are the kind of locations where the police are saying, well, we've been enforcing there for decades with a camera man, a camera van and or police officers pulling people over. That's where they see that cameras could play a part, even if there hasn't been a huge history of collisions.
Okay, I would like to come back very briefly, please, John. So, yeah, just one of the comments that you made there about, the police, if they think that there is a viable option for traffic calming, then the cameras wouldn't be a recommendation. And I understand that. The point I'm trying to make is that, yes, there are locations where traffic calming would be good. But there just isn't the funds available to provide those traffic calming measures. Hence my infinite loop comment that we're just in a cycle of not getting anything done, and that is, you've just demonstrated adequately to me there that this in a lot of cases is just not going to solve any problems. So we need to address that, and I'd like to see that addressed in the recommendation, please, Chairman. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Mark.
Thank you, John. And it's just actually for my own information. In the annex, under 221, core casualty reduction speed enforcement sites, new speed camera sites will be identified and prioritised using a points-based system per kilometre over the 3 most recent years. And my question there is, why is it 3 years? Why is it not longer? Thank you, John.
Because we want to use the most up-to-date data in assessing which is no point looking at casualties that happened several years ago, because other things may have happened to the road or to the volumes of traffic that make what happened several years ago less relevant to what we ought to do now.
Okay, Mark. Good, straight answer. Just
it just seems 3 just seems to be arbitrary. So I understand you don't want to go back 20 years necessarily, but okay.
It's a standard kind of number of years that is used in road safety engineering to determine which sites need the most attention.
Okay. Thank you both. Lance.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. So one of the most visible changes for residents recommended in the local transport plan is the establishment of 20-mile-an-hour zones and 20-minute communities. The Surrey County Council policy on speed limits was last changed in 2014, and I don't believe really reflects the urgencies of the changes needed from the climate emergency that we're in. What plans does the council have for updating the policy, the speed limit policy that is, as this relates to this particular issue, so that it can be better based on the climate emergency rather than primarily on optimising motorised transport?
Well, I guess my initial response to that is this is a report about speed enforcement, not a report on speed limit policy. We don't have any specific plans to amend our 20-mile-an-hour speed limit policy at the moment. I think there is a lot more emphasis on introducing 20-mile-an-hour schemes, but currently our policy ensures that when we do implement them, they are implemented in a effective and targeted way to ensure that they actually work. One of the big issues with 20-mile-an-hour schemes is if you simply put signs up saying 20 and the prevailing speeds are closer to, say, 30, you may get 1 or 2 miles per hour reduction, but you won't get anything like a reduction towards 20 miles per hour. Therefore, our policy, based on national guidance and best practice, suggests that additional supporting measures would be required to get the speeds down successfully. And we've reviewed that policy, and the best research, or most latest research by Atkins on that in 2018 reaffirmed that kind of approach would be the most successful approach. and there's lots of 20 schemes being implemented, or work is going on to implement them across Surrey just now. For example, Farnham Town Centre, Weybridge, there's a 20-mile-per-hour speed limit in Reigate Town Centre, to name a few, and probably more to come. Caterham as well, there's work going on there too.
That takes us right back to the the first question from Councillor Daly on 20 miles an hour. I think Lucy'd like to come in as well, maybe to answer Lance's question.
Yeah,
thanks, Duncan. But Lucy, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just building on that. So I think the speed limit review policy has been reviewed since then, as Duncan sort of highlighted. So it's perhaps not out of date as that 2014 figures suggest. But also, I just to refer back perhaps to the answer that was covered earlier by that question, which is the Surrey Transport Plan proposals at the moment does talk about, you know, the suitability of 20-mile-an-hour zones more widely across the network. So I guess we would look to see how that would inform any further wider approaches in that respect. So it's not wanting to dismiss it as part perhaps of the wider consideration of our transport network.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Lance. Who's next? Jordan.
Thank you. I was just wondering, when it says community concern, I'm just wondering if like noise from the highway would be incorporated within that. I'm thinking of busy A roads where, especially overnight, there's HGVs just speeding through 40, 50 miles per hour in a 30 mile per hour zone, for example. So I'm just wondering if that's a consideration. I know you said air quality was as well, and if that's included in the policy, that I can't see any mention of it. And also, I was just wondering, will we see a similar policy for moving traffic offences as well, seeing as the council is getting that power? Thank you.
Certainly. Thank you. So, yeah, with regard to noise and managing speed, certainly you can help reduce the impacts of noise pollution from vehicles by managing speeds more effectively. And I know this has been a very big talking point in Mole Valley, particularly with motorcyclists and sports vehicles in the lockdown periods. We wouldn't necessarily be going out measuring the level of noise in order to inform upon, the need for cameras, but we will look at speeds, and if there is local funding available and a location meets our criteria for enforcement in terms of there is a speeding issue and that there's money available to put a camera in, and traffic calming isn't going to be a viable solution, then if the reason that the local people want it to be put in is partly due to noise, then certainly we can put that in.
Well, that's interesting. Thanks, Jordan.
Do you want me to just come in on the moving traffic offences point?
Yep.
Just the other point. So yes, we are. We submitted our expression of interest to get those powers to the DFT earlier this week, so we'll wait to see, but we would absolutely be looking to maximise the use of that legislation along with various other policies to try and address some of those problems that you're describing.
Thank you. Just before we go on, just Paul and Lance, you've got your hands up. I don't know whether they're legacy hands or new questions. If they're new questions, I'll come to you eventually. But first, Andy.
Thanks, John. At our pre-meeting, John, I raised the question, where did all the money go from the fines? And you informed me that it went to central government. And I did look at this up, actually, and you're absolutely right. Something like 270 million goes to central government from fines for speeding. And then there's something like 60 million is raised in terms of speed awareness courses that people can go on to avoid getting extra points in the license under certain circumstances. And much of that money goes to the police, actually, because they have to administer all this stuff. So that's all very well. But the other interesting thing I came across, actually, when I was looking into this, that the cost of road accidents of the national economy, according to the Department of Transport, is something like 36 billion in every year. And that's an enormous amount of money, and that overshadows everything about fines and And speeding is a big part of this. But it's mainly driver behaviour that causes accidents, actually. And something like half of these accidents are easily preventable, apparently, at the Department of Transport. But I personally think speed cameras are important. I think there should be more of them around the place. But they need to get away from this idea that they're a revenue-earning thing, because that makes them very unpopular with the public, and it makes them unpopular with motoring organisations that campaigned against them, and so on and so forth. And I just think the national policy in this is absolutely hopeless. If it's costing us 36 billion a year, we should be doing a lot more about it, and there should be a lot more speed cameras. But we apparently have to put them in. One of the parties that have to put them in, but we don't get any revenue from doing it, and that's the thing. So the whole thing strikes me a load of nonsense, actually. To be honest, largely the government's fault. They should get their act together, and I really don't know what we should be doing about it. But I'm in favour of more speed cameras. I don't know about other people's behaviour. I've only ever had one speeding fine in my life, and it was many, many years ago. And I take notice of speed cameras and so on when I drive in general, and I think quite a lot of people do. Anyway, I don't know if I'm adding very much to the discussion here, John.
But apart from alerting us that you're a hardened criminal, actually, no, the point you made, Andy, very, very, very valid indeed. I don't know whether Duncan or Matt or Lucy want to make any particular comments to those you've just made.
Yeah. Thanks, John.
Yeah, if I may. Yeah, it's well known that investment in road safety interventions, highway solutions or enforcement have a very, very good cost-benefit return because of the impacts to society of road collisions, including the lost output of the people who are victims of the collision. I would agree that speed cameras can be a very useful tool. But they need to be targeted at the places where they're needed the most if we want to get the best return in terms of casualty reduction. And this is what this policy does. But it also adds that extra bit on community concern to reach those wider objectives, supporting walking and cycling and noise and air pollution as well. Just to clarify on the money, yes, fines go to central government via the courts, but those who choose to go on a speed awareness course instead, part of their fee comes back to the police, and that can be used to pay for the operation and implementation of new safety cameras. So the core safety camera sites that we'll be tackling as a priority won't cost the county council anything, and the ongoing maintenance will not cost the county council anything, because we recover those costs from the police, who in turn recover their costs and our costs from part of the fee that people pay to attend diversionary courses like speed awareness courses.
Thanks, Duncan, and thanks, Andy. Next is Catherine.
Thank you. Two questions. One's an observation. In section 5, you've got a cost-benefit analysis. And I suggest that if you were to add in the benefits of increased active travel and more cohesive local communities in terms of health and reduced crime, that cost-benefit analysis would be even healthier. And this is going back on to something we've touched on already, but as we all know, there is a backlog of communities with speed concerns, local speed concerns, waiting for their sites to be assessed or progressed in some way. And do you see the advent of more traffic cameras, which do change people's behaviours? It's not just like putting up a sign. It actually, as we've all seen from the paper, these speed cameras change people's behaviour in terms of the way they drive. And do you see, therefore, this policy in any way impacting the waiting time for communities who've already highlighted their concerns? They're in the lists in the on the local committees. Is it going to help them at all, do you think?
Yeah, I think it absolutely is.
So how?
Yeah, certainly.
How in the process?
Yeah, so we work very closely and successfully with the police in partnership to create local speed management plans. We've got a speed management plan for each borough and district in Surrey. And this speed management plan is basically a list of all the sites where speeding has been raised as a concern to either the police, to the county council's local highways team, or directly to the road safety team, or via members. So we hoover up, if you like, all the speeding complaints into one place. And then we have a full-time member of staff paid for from the camera partnership, from part of the fees that people pay for speed awareness courses, so fully funded, whose full-time job it is to go out and put speed detection radar boxes up on lamp columns or street furniture at these locations for a week without anyone really knowing that it's there or what it's doing. And we collect that data, and we've got data on over 1,000 sites across Surrey over several years of data collection. So we know which sites have the worst speeding problems. We know which have the worst casualty problems because that's reported by the police, and you can see that for yourself on crashmap.co.uk. And we prioritise our interventions at the sites that need the most attention based on the number of casualties and the level of speeding. So we will have one for Reigate and Banstead, where the police will deploy their resources to the worst casualty hotspots. But if we put some cameras in to deal with those, including some of the community concern sites, then those police officers will be free and available to tackle some of the other sites more frequently.
Okay. Thanks, Duncan. Thanks, Catherine. Jonathan.
Thank you, Chair. I'm supportive of this draft policy, and I like this establishment or creation of these two categories of speed enforcement sites. And I'm a fan of category 2, which of course is this community concern safety camera sites. I think that is what communities want, and I think they will be supportive of that. However, you then go on to say that central funding for this will prioritise category 1 only. And then you mentioned further that we need to go away and consider alternative sources of funding for category 2. Can you assure this committee that there is going to be funding for category 2, and that what you're looking at in respect of category 1 will not just gobble up all the money available? So actually category 2, which matters to our residents, actually in practical terms never sees the light of day. Could you give us some assurances around that, please? Thank you.
Yeah, if I respond initially, and perhaps Lucy might want to come in afterwards. The money that will be available as if you like, that's a surplus from the police after they've recovered all their costs from running cameras, from part of the fee that people pay to attend speed awareness courses. If there's some money left after they've recovered their costs and our costs, that money is then available for reinvestment in road safety. And that's where money is used to prioritise at the core casualty sites. And I think that's right and proper and the moral thing to do, because those are the sites where if we don't do something, then people will continue to be hurt and, God forbid, be killed, as we know from the history of collisions at some of those sites. So I wouldn't want to divert any of that money to the community concern sites. But what we're doing here is saying we won't say no to community concern sites. We would like to support those as well, but instead the money for those will have to be coming from the local committees, budget for highway improvements, or where we can perhaps find other alternative sources, such as SIL, which I think might be an option if we were to bid to the district and boroughs and developer funding. There may also be opportunities through investment from major projects, major schemes. So if we're doing major improvements to a section of road or junctions, then as part of that multi-million-pound project, we might look at the opportunities to improve the safety on that stretch as a small part of the total fees available from that scheme. If we were to bid to the district and boroughs and developer.
Thank you.
I will just come in as Duncan suggested. I'm not sure I can add much more to that. It's a balance here, isn't it? I suppose what we're trying to do is maximise what we've got with the funding available, but as ever in kind of the times we're in, we do need to look to use other available sources of funding or maximise those to be able to deliver the additional benefits here. So, but all the suggestions Duncan has outlined there are very feasible. If the budget's there, it's about working and identifying that and getting the support from the communities and exploring how to do some of this stuff.
Thank you. My only comment is, and it may well have been answered, so it follows it straight on from what Jonathan's questions were, and that is, taking a stand back from the paper, the issue potentially of raising, maybe deliberately raising expectations amongst our residents about what can, as a result of the change of policy or the evolution of policy and the creation of the two new criteria for speed cameras, and I think Duncan may well have reassured me on the first, because there'll be no additional funding for category 1, but there is obviously a regular stream of finance because of the speed awareness courses. So we're looking ahead. To what extent, but realistically, will the relaxing of the criteria even for stage for the active speed cameras, is it likely that rather more sites, maybe only a handful, will materialise as opposed to what exists under the more restricted safety criteria for average speed cameras? So, because what we wouldn't want to do, none of us in this meeting would want to do, is unduly raise expectations that there's going to be a proliferation of speed cameras, particularly of average speed cameras on the main roads, when the reality is the funding levels are broadly the same, year on year from these courses. So that's one point. The question is, does that sound reasonable to you, what I've kind of summarised? The second is exactly the same. It comes back to Paul, again, what Jonathan was just saying on the community concern sites, is again, there will be a raised expectation, probably a much greater raised expectation on community sites. All of us have the 2 or 3 in our own division, which wouldn't a spot camera there be rather good? And yes, we talk about the ability for of funding from our own highways allocation plus SIL plus others could make these things a reality, which is great. On the other hand, as Paul was saying right at the beginning of the discussion, if the system, this great squidge of the system, because of other highways alternatives rather than the speed camera, means that that loop that Paul was talking about materializes more than a few times on every occasion, that will again reduce the likelihood of these speed cameras being introduced at all, which will then create disillusionment, resentment, unhappiness. The council promises this, but nothing has ever happened. And I don't want to sound negative, because I think all of us support the policy, all of us want to make it work, but we have to engender a sense of realism as to what a change of policy will actually result in the number of speed cameras, both at category 1 level and category 2 level. Does what I say ring an echo with Duncan and the team?
Yeah, if I may, I think there has historically been money left over after we've paid for our running costs for reinvestment in road safety and investment in new sites. And I'll trail a new scheme that's about to, be submitted to local committees in Guildford and Surrey Heath for average speed cameras on what I call the per-bike bends: Gatemouth Road, Mitchett Place Road, Grange Road and Gold Road, which would be of interest to Councillor Paul Deach, I think, particularly. And that's going to be paid for from the central core funding, because that has had a long history of collisions, including many involving serious injury and some deaths as well. And there will be probably similar levels of funding to do that kind of scheme in future years at other sites around the county. And we're starting to compile a list of potentially new core safety camera sites. In addition to that, I'm sure there will be requests for spot speed cameras and other average speed camera schemes that we will receive from members and the community. And I guess we'll need to find a process to compile those, list those, assess the feasibility, report back on the likely cost of each site, so that then the local committee and the local member can work with us on seeing what the opportunities are to fund those. But from anecdotal knowledge of where all those speeding problems are, from what I remember from our speed management plans, I think there's an opportunity for a lot of more cameras. The main barrier will be probably the funding.
Well, pity you said that right at the end, but I take your point. It was possible apart from the funding. Okay, Catherine.
Just picking up on what you just mentioned, Duncan. Am I right in understanding that you will assess the, if you like, the suggestions that are already in the box? That people have raised already, that you will assess those before paying attention to new ones being raised, or should members re-raise concerns that have already been raised, if you like? I'm just a bit concerned about the concerns that are already in the basket, that they don't get lost.
Yeah, I think it's a fair point to ask that question. We haven't considered in great detail yet what the process will be, but we will need to think about how requests are submitted and compiled, and then we can report back and talk about the roadmap between requesting one and how to get one implemented over and above others that may also be requested as well, and which we can have the resources to implement, because that may also be slightly a limiting factor. For example, if we have 10 schemes requested and money found for 10 schemes, we won't probably be able to implement 10 schemes in the space of a year. That would be too much for officers to cope with. So we'd have to think a way of which ones we would do first. So yeah, the process will come next, and I think we have to be very careful on how we communicate what that process is to members and to the local community and web pages and so on and so forth.
Thanks, Duncan. I think Lucy would like to come in too.
Yeah, I think Duncan just started to cover it really. I think there's an action for us to take away here about being much clearer on the or getting some clarity around a process, so we can be open about how that flows through. So to your point about managing expectations, that feels that would help, and if we can set out the options around funding and the timing and not raising expectations, so we can certainly go away and prepare something that will help perhaps inform members a bit further on those points to manage those expectations you're talking about.
Thanks very much, Lucy and Duncan. Okay, we may need we had some sort of model recommendations, whatever you want to call them, earlier on. They probably need more revision perhaps than the other three, because the discussion we've just had has been very, very illuminating and helpful. But anyway, so we have now three. So we'll do our usual practice of a minute to absorb and cogitate on these recommendations, and then we'll open up for any discussion on them. More revision perhaps than the other three, because the discussion we've just had has been very, very illuminating. I'm not sure and helpful. I'm not sure that this is why I don't know, Kungwa, on the first one, which is one I suggested, whether as no additional funding for these will be forthcoming, is as germane now as it was when I wrote it. So I'm not sure we need to put that in, given that there will be a stream of funding that will be just maintained from the courses. That would be my only revision of my own initial recommendation.
Are you happy for me to jump in now, John?
Yeah, of course, Paul.
Just looking at number 2, which I think relates to what I said. I'm not sure whether that demonstrates what the concerns that I raised, and certainly you then raised, John. I don't think it does it. It's not strong enough.
But you don't have to suggest exact words, but convey sentiment. And
I know, I'm trying to. I will. I'm going to go on mute and turn my camera off because we're getting stage fright.
You've got 30 seconds to tell us what you actually think, and then Kunwar will weave his magic, and it will come on the screen. Whilst Paul is cogitating, any other colleague on any of the recommendations would like to add or detract or from them? If not, we'll just wait in semi-patience until Catherine has her hand up. So over to you, Catherine.
In going back to number 1, could we put something in there about realistic expectations rather than unduly raised?
Yes, that makes sense. Online Ross Pike saying online recommendation can be agreed now. Yeah, we can finesse the wording. There's Mr. Pike helping us out. We don't have to go exact wording, but if we can, at least for Paul. Thanks, Catherine. I think happy to
actually now that he's split it out a bit more. It actually now with the right punctuation makes it look a bit more appropriate. I'm just trying to read number 3. Yeah.
Okay.
With a mixture of 2 and 3, I think now it's starting to be more like it.
Okay.
I would welcome any other members' views on that.
Can I just? I don't. Maybe it's me, but I don't understand number 2. I don't know. It's the these are themselves are not deficient. I don't know what that means.
Okay.
I think it was partly covering the infinite loop comment by Paul, which then is resolved in 3. But we can take it off if it confuses you rather than provide a solution.
Okay. I mean, it's not. I don't think it's going to be a vote of confidence and the collapse of Surrey if we don't get the exact wording correct now. As long as the sentiments are agreed, which I think they are. So, colleagues, assuming no extra hands, we'll finesse it as to Catherine's satisfaction.
I think what I do understand what Catherine's saying, and I think it's that word deficient.
Okay.
It's probably best changed to they themselves are not a reason rather than deficient.
Okay.
And I like the costs, etc.
Yeah.
Okay.
Included in that.
Yeah. Well, Reigate and Surrey Heath have joined together. Let no Hershemite tear us under. Right. Right, I think we've come to that. Again, I think officers can stay, but if all of the officers who've been with us right from and Matt from the beginning of 10 o'clock, thank you so much. It really is appreciated. There have been 4 excellent reports, which I hope our deliberations have added value to, and our collective thanks and appreciation to you all. Thank you very much. Okay, I think the final item, which is one we normally don't spend too long on, but we can get ourselves tied up in awful knots, is the forward work programme. So, Kunwar, if you would be kind enough to show us. Before we do the forward work programme, as for December, there, as Lance will know, because we both sit on the budget committee, there will be an informal session of the committee or meeting of the committee. When is it? In November? I can't remember now. Or October. Soon, specifically to talk about budget. We will have another one in December, but we're looking ahead. But don't worry, a lot of the budget will be done in October. Some will be in December, but we've also got other stuff that we would suggest the committee considers. Can you help us out, Kunwar, on this?
Yes, so I don't have anything to add to what is being proposed and was circulated.
Okay.
We have a number of items, really meaty stuff coming in the next 2 meetings, in addition to the budget meeting, which is an extra meeting in October. So unless you have any questions, I think that's
thanks, Kumar. I think that's so. We've all seen the agenda, the forward plan. Now's the opportunity, if there is something that is not there that should be there, to we do this every meeting, so it's always updated. So don't worry. But if there's anything specific that colleagues think we should be putting in for December and into the new year, now is certainly an opportunity. But I'm not going to. Lance.
A really easy question. So the Surrey transport plan's down for us for December for review, which is good. When does it go to Cabinet? Because I had the feeling it went to Cabinet before then.
Lucy might be able to. Okay.
I think it's January.
Yeah, no, it's either. Yeah, I can't. It's definitely after it's been here. I'm sure. I don't think. Yeah.
Confirm that.
This is the Tim Oliver directive. Quite right too. That nothing goes before Cabinet until it's been scrutinised by the relevant select committee, and long may that policy continue. So the answer is, Lance, we get to look at it before it goes to Cabinet.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, right. Well, at almost 1:30, we'll do 1:29. Thank you all very, very much. That was I hope that was for how was it for you? I think it was hopefully it was a very valuable meeting. I thank you, colleagues, very, very much for making this such a successful meeting. And until October, enjoy the rest of the day and the weeks ahead. Thanks very much. Take care. Bye.
Thank you.